Hey friend, I'm here to help you relax and sleep tonight. The channel is going through a difficult time and I really need your support. The encourage button is very important. You can find it below the video next to the like and subscribe buttons. Click it now. Every click helps this video reach new people. Your likes and comments are also very important. Even a simple word or the time you watch the video makes a big difference. Please click the encourage button. Hit like. Leave a comment. Anything at all. Your support makes a real difference and helps this video reach people who need it. Thank you so much for your time and support. The Appalachian Trail stretched before me like a ribbon of earth cutting through dense wilderness. 3 days into what was supposed to be a week-long solo hiking trip, I'd pushed myself beyond the well-traveled sections, seeking solitude in the remote northern reaches where cell service disappeared and ranger stations were marked in miles rather than minutes. I'd been an avid hiker for years, accumulating gear and experience in equal measure. My 65-liter pack contained everything needed for extended backcountry travel: lightweight tent, sub-zero sleeping bag, water filtration system, emergency medical supplies, and enough dehydrated meals to last 10 days. Experience had taught me to always pack extra, a lesson that would soon prove more valuable than I could have imagined. The morning began with a strenuous climb up a series of switchbacks. The October air carried an unexpected chill, causing my breath to form small clouds that dissipated among the towering pines. Wildlife had been surprisingly scarce that morning. No squirrels darting across the path, no birds calling from the canopy. The forest felt unnaturally still, as if holding its breath. I reached the first plateau around noon and paused to record my progress in the trail log I'd been keeping. October 15th, Day 3, reached Black Ridge Plateau. Weather clear, temperature dropping. Trail conditions good, but showing less maintenance the further north I go. Haven't seen another hiker since yesterday morning. The solitude is exactly what I needed. After a quick lunch of trail mix and jerky, I continued toward my planned campsite at Summit Lake, still 4 miles ahead. The path narrowed as it wound through increasingly dense forest. Old-growth trees towered overhead, their massive trunks covered in thick moss creating a canopy so dense that the afternoon sun barely penetrated. The first unusual incident occurred around 3 o'clock. I had stopped to adjust my bootlaces when I heard what sounded like footsteps on the trail behind me, a distinct crunching of leaves and snapping of twigs. I turned, expecting to see another hiker, but the trail stretched empty behind me. Dismissing it as wildlife, I continued on. 30 minutes later, it happened again. This time, the sound was closer, deliberate steps following my pace. I called out, "Hello?" Someone there. My voice sounded hollow among the trees. No response came, but the sound stopped immediately. The trail map indicated I was in one of the most remote sections of the park. According to the ranger I'd spoken with before setting out, hikers were scarce this time of year, especially midweek. I quickened my pace, attributing my unease to isolation and the approaching dusk. As twilight descended, Summit Lake finally appeared through the trees, a small, pristine body of water nestled in a natural depression between 2 ridgelines. I found a flat clearing about 50 yards from the shore and began setting up camp with practiced efficiency. While gathering firewood, I discovered the first truly disconcerting sign. Approximately 30 yards from my tent, partially obscured by undergrowth, was what appeared to be a crude arrangement of stones and sticks. The formation wasn't natural. Someone had deliberately arranged 3 large stones in a triangle with smaller rocks forming a spiral pattern inside. At the center lay a small pile of bones, too small to be human, likely from a rabbit or squirrel. My first thought was that other campers had left the arrangement, perhaps as some kind of marker. But something about its construction felt ritualistic, almost ceremonial. An old conversation with a park ranger from years ago surfaced in my memory. Tales of how certain Native American tribes believed in entities that stalked lonely travelers in the wilderness. I returned to my campsite, built a fire larger than necessary, and cooked dinner while constantly scanning the tree line. As darkness enveloped the forest, the sounds began. Subtle at first, then increasingly distinct. Movement in the underbrush, branches shifting without wind. Once what sounded distinctly like footsteps circling my campsite, just beyond the fire's illumination. I withdrew my hunting knife from my pack and placed it beside my sleeping bag. Sleep came in restless intervals, interrupted by what sounded like whispers just outside my tent. So faint I couldn't be certain they weren't just the wind playing tricks through the trees. Something had found me in these woods. Whether human, animal, or something else entirely, I couldn't say. But as I finally drifted into uneasy sleep, one thought persisted. Whatever was out there, it was watching, waiting, and somehow, impossibly mimicking my movements. Dawn arrived with merciful brightness after a night of fractured sleep. I emerged from my tent to find the campsite undisturbed. No footprints, no evidence of the nocturnal visitor that had stalked the perimeter of my camp. The morning light provided temporary relief from the previous night's anxiety, and I briefly entertained the possibility that exhaustion had heightened my imagination. After a breakfast of instant oatmeal and coffee, I decided to explore the area around Summit Lake. The waters were perfectly still, reflecting the surrounding forest like a natural mirror. I filled my canteens and treated them with purification tablets, then consulted my topographical map. My original plan had been to continue north for another 3 days before looping back south toward the ranger station. But something about this location felt wrong, a persistent discomfort I couldn't rationalize away. I decided to alter my course, heading east toward Miller Ridge, where another trail would eventually connect to a Forest Service road. It would cut my trip short by 2 days but provide an alternate route back to civilization. While packing my gear, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The spiral stone arrangement I'd discovered yesterday, the one located 30 yards from my campsite, had changed overnight. The bones at the center were gone, replaced by a small piece of fabric that looked suspiciously like it had been cut from my backpack. I checked my gear immediately and found a small section missing from an external pocket, a clean cut that couldn't have been accidental. Someone had approached my camp during the night, taken a piece of my equipment and placed it in the stone arrangement. The implications were undeniable. I was being tracked by another human with unclear intentions. He abruptly changed plans. Instead of lingering to explore, I packed quickly and started east toward Miller Ridge, pushing the pace faster than I'd normally hike. The trail in this direction was less maintained, requiring careful navigation over fallen trees and through dense underbrush. Twice I had to consult my compass to verify I was still heading east when the path became indistinct. Around midday, I stopped to rest in a small clearing. While drinking from my canteen, I heard it again, the sound of movement in the forest behind me, mimicking my own pattern. Stop when I stopped, move when I moved. This time I didn't call out. Instead, I quietly gathered my things and continued forward, straining to hear any pursuit. The game of acoustic cat and mouse continued for another hour. Whenever I'd pause, the sounds would stop seconds later. Whenever I'd resume walking, the sounds would follow after a brief delay. I began taking deliberate, irregular steps, 3 quick paces, then a pause, then 5 slow steps. And the pattern following me would adjust accordingly, though always several seconds behind. This wasn't an echo. This was something or someone deliberately mimicking my movements. By late afternoon, heavy clouds had rolled in, bringing a premature darkness to the forest. The temperature dropped sharply and a light rain began to fall. I needed to make camp before the weather deteriorated further. But the idea of stopping with my pursuer so close behind filled me with dread. I pushed on until I found a defensible position, a small ledge overlooking a steep decline. With the cliff wall at my back and clear visibility of the approach from all other directions, I quickly erected my tent and collected firewood before the rain intensified. As I worked, movement caught my eye approximately 50 yards downslope. Through the trees and gathering mist, I glimpsed what appeared to be a human figure, standing perfectly still, watching me. When I straightened to get a better look, it retreated behind a large tree trunk. I called out again, louder this time. "I can see you. What do you want?" My voice echoed through the forest, answered only by the increasing patter of rain on leaves. After several minutes of scanning the area, I saw no further movement but couldn't shake the certainty that I was being observed. The rain became a downpour as night fell completely. I huddled in my tent, the small camp stove providing minimal heat as I reviewed my options. The nearest ranger station was at least 2 days' hike in any direction. I had a satellite emergency beacon, but activating it without clear and present danger seemed premature. Around midnight, the rain briefly subsided. In that moment of relative quiet, I heard it, a sound unlike anything I'd encountered before, a whistling noise almost melodic coming from the darkness beyond my camp. It started low, then rose in pitch until it resembled a human voice attempting to mimic birdsong, but with all the wrong inflections. The whistling continued for almost a minute, then stopped abruptly. 10 minutes later, it resumed from a different direction, now to my right instead of directly ahead. Then again from my left. Whatever was making the sound was circling my position. I extinguished my lamp and sat in complete darkness, knife in hand, listening as the whistling moved around me. In the brief moments between calls, I could hear movement, something large navigating through wet underbrush with surprising agility. Then came the scratching at my tent, gentle at first, then more insistent. Not claws or nails, but something hard and pointed, like the tip of a stick or bone, tracing patterns on the rainfly. I remained motionless, hardly breathing, as the scratching continued for what felt like hours but was likely only minutes. When it finally stopped, I heard retreating footsteps followed by one final whistle, lower in pitch, almost mournful, from far down the slope. I didn't sleep that night. I sat upright, knife ready, until the first gray light of dawn penetrated the tent walls. Only then did I dare to emerge and examine what had been left behind. In the mud surrounding my tent were footprints, human in shape but oddly distorted, as if the feet that made them were somehow misshapen. And on the rainfly itself, etched into the fabric with something sharp enough to score but not puncture the material, was a crude spiral pattern, identical to the one formed by the stones I'd discovered the previous day. Morning revealed the full impact of the overnight storm. The trail east had become a muddy channel, and several trees had fallen across the path ahead. After examining the cryptic marking on my tent, I packed with renewed urgency, abandoning any pretense of a leisurely hike. This was now about survival and escape. I decided to leave the established trail and head directly south toward the highway that cut through the national forest. According to my map, it was approximately 15 miles away, a challenging but doable cross-country trek if I maintained a good pace. Going off-trail carried its own risks, but staying on a predictable path seemed more dangerous with something clearly tracking my movements. The forest grew denser as I descended into the valley. Navigating by compass, I pushed through thickets and scrambled over moss-covered boulders. The physical exertion provided temporary distraction from the growing sense of dread that had settled over me since discovering the markings. Around mid-morning, I encountered a small stream swollen by the rainfall. As I searched for a crossing point, something caught my eye on the opposite bank. A crude structure assembled from branches and animal hides stretched over a frame. It resembled a primitive shelter, recently constructed based on the freshness of the broken branches. Beside the shelter lay the remains of a small fire, still smoldering despite the rain. Hanging from a nearby branch was what appeared to be a deer carcass, partially skinned with surgical precision. The methodical nature of the butchering indicated this wasn't the work of another predator. I changed direction immediately, giving the sight a wide berth as I continued southward. Whoever had constructed that shelter and processed that animal with such skill was undoubtedly the same entity that had been tracking me. The implications were unsettling. This wasn't some random hiker or hunter, but someone living in these woods, moving with the kind of woodcraft that spoke of intimate knowledge of the terrain. By noon, the clouds had cleared, allowing me to better orient myself using the sun. I'd made good progress, covering approximately 6 miles of difficult terrain. According to my map, I was approaching a region marked as Johnson's Hollow, a deep valley notorious among local hikers for its disorienting topography and dense vegetation. As I began the descent into the hollow, I spotted something that froze me in place. Approximately 30 yards ahead, partially concealed by a fallen log, was a dark figure crouching in the underbrush. The angle and distance made details difficult to discern, but the shape was unmistakably human or humanoid. I slowly backed away, seeking cover behind a large oak. When I peered out again, the figure had vanished. I waited 10 minutes, scanning the area before cautiously proceeding, every sense heightened to painful alertness. That's when I noticed the silence. No birds called in the canopy. No insects buzzed in the underbrush. The forest had gone completely unnaturally still, as if every living thing was holding its breath. Pressing onward, I entered Johnson's Hollow proper. The temperature dropped noticeably as I descended into the shadowed valley. Ancient trees grew so densely here that the midday sun barely penetrated to the forest floor. The ground was carpeted with a thick layer of decaying leaves and moss muffling my footsteps. I'd covered another mile when I found the first effigy. Suspended from a low branch, hanging at approximately eye level, was a crude doll constructed from twigs and grass, bound with what looked like human hair. The face had been fashioned from pale clay, featureless except for 2 deep holes where eyes should be. 20 yards further, I found another. Then another. Soon I was walking through a macabre gallery of these silent sentinels, each one seemingly watching my progress through the hollow. Some were simple constructions. Others displayed disturbing attention to anatomical detail, with fingers and toes crafted from small bones. The symbolism was impossible to misinterpret. I was being warned. Whatever stalked these woods was communicating its awareness of my presence, its dominion over this territory. As afternoon waned, I increased my pace, determined to clear the hollow before nightfall. The effigies became more frequent, and now I noticed other disturbances. Trees with bark stripped in precise patterns, animal skeletons arranged in geometric formations on the forest floor, and twice, the distinct impression of those same misshapen footprints I'd seen outside my tent. The sun was setting when I reached a clearing and saw something that defied rational explanation. In the center of the open space stood what appeared to be a person dressed in animal hides, standing perfectly still with their back toward me. The figure was tall and gaunt, limbs too long for its torso. Atop its head was what looked like a deer skull, complete with antlers positioned as a macabre helmet. I froze, barely breathing, as the figure remained motionless for nearly a minute. Then with jerky, unnatural movements it began to turn. Instinct took over before I could glimpse its face. I retreated into the tree line and circled wide around the clearing, heart pounding so loudly I feared it would give away my position. Night was falling rapidly as I finally emerged from Johnson's Hollow. I'd gained significant ground toward the highway, but was still at least 8 miles from potential safety. Making camp was unthinkable after what I'd witnessed, so I continued hiking by flashlight, navigating by compass and the occasional glimpse of stars through the canopy. 2 hours into my night trek, the flashlight batteries began to fail. The beam weakened, then flickered, providing only intermittent illumination. I had spares in my pack, but stopping long enough to change them felt dangerous. Instead, I continued forward in semi-darkness, using the fading light only when absolutely necessary to check my bearing. That's when the whistling began again, the same eerie, not quite natural sound I'd heard the previous night. This time it came from behind me, perhaps a quarter-mile back. Then another whistle answered from somewhere to my right. Then a third from ahead. The realization hit me with horrifying clarity. There was more than one. Whatever was stalking me through these woods, it wasn't alone. The whistling continued, a triangulated communication that clearly suggested coordinated movement. I extinguished my failing flashlight completely, relying instead on the faint moonlight filtering through the trees. Moving as silently as possible, I navigated by touch and shadow, desperate to break the encirclement that was forming around me. Progress was painfully slow. Every few minutes I would pause to listen, tracking the movement of my pursuers through their whistling exchanges. They seemed to be maintaining a consistent distance, close enough to monitor my progress but not yet closing in for whatever confrontation they intended. Around midnight, I reached a small stream. The sound of running water would mask my movement, so I decided to wade upstream, hoping to break my trail and confuse pursuit. The October water was numbingly cold, but fear provided sufficient insulation against discomfort. I traveled nearly half a mile in the knee-deep current before finding a rocky bank that would leave minimal tracks when I exited. After changing into dry socks from my waterproof bag, wet feet could mean frostbite. In the dropping temperatures, I continued south by southeast. The whistling had faded, suggesting my stream strategy had temporarily disoriented my pursuers. I used this reprieve to gain ground, pushing myself beyond normal endurance. According to my map, I was approaching a region marked as Peterson's Ridge, a steep elevation that, if I could climb it, would provide better visibility and potentially cell service if I was lucky. The climb was grueling, a near vertical ascent over loose shale and exposed tree roots. Twice I lost my footing, sliding several feet before catching myself. By the time I reached the ridge's summit, my hands were raw and bleeding from grasping at rocks and branches. The vantage point confirmed my location. In the far distance, perhaps 5 miles south, I could see the occasional headlights moving along what must be the highway, my destination and salvation. Between my position and that road lay a dense valley, then one final ridgeline. I checked my phone. Still no service, but the battery was holding at 62%. I decided to risk changing my flashlight batteries, working quickly with trembling hands. The fresh light revealed the time, 2:17 a.m. Dawn was still hours away. That's when I heard it, not whistling this time, but a low, rhythmic drumming. The sound carried clearly in the night air, emanating from somewhere in the valley below. The beat was steady and deliberate, accompanied occasionally by what sounded like chanting in a language I couldn't identify. From my elevated position, I spotted a faint orange glow among the trees, a fire approximately a mile away. The rational part of my mind suggested these might be other campers, but after what I'd witnessed, I knew better. This was them, whatever they were, engaged in some kind of ritual. I had two options: circle wide around the valley, adding miles to my journey but avoiding direct contact, or take the most direct route toward the highway, which would bring me within half a mile of their position. The longer route meant spending another full day in the forest. The direct path meant potential confrontation but possible escape before dawn. Exhaustion and fear battled within me as I made my decision. I would take the direct route but move with extreme caution. If detected, I would abandon stealth for speed and make a break for the highway. Descending the ridge proved almost as challenging as climbing it. The loose soil gave way under my boots, triggering small slides of rocks and dirt. Each minor avalanche sounded deafening in the night stillness, and I winced with every step, certain I was broadcasting my location. By 3:30 a.m., I'd reached the valley floor and was approaching the half-mile perimeter around the fire glow. The drumming had intensified, now accompanied by what sounded like multiple voices. I extinguished my flashlight and proceeded by moonlight, moving from tree to tree, pausing frequently to listen and observe. At the quarter-mile mark, I could see the fire clearly through the trees, a substantial blaze in a small clearing. Shadowy figures moved around it, though from my distance I couldn't discern details beyond their humanoid shapes. The chanting had reached a crescendo, punctuated by what sounded like animal cries, though something in their tone raised the hairs on my neck. I had nearly cleared their position when disaster struck. A rotted branch beneath my foot gave way with a loud crack. The chanting stopped instantly. The drumming ceased mid-beat. The forest went completely silent. I didn't wait to see their reaction. Abandoning all pretense of stealth, I broke into a dead run, crashing through underbrush toward the south. Behind me I heard shouts and the sounds of pursuit, rapid footfalls and that same whistling, now higher-pitched and more urgent. Running through a forest at night is a desperate gamble. Each step risked a turned ankle or worse, but fear propelled me forward with reckless abandon. Branches whipped at my face, leaving stinging welts. Twice I fell, scrambling back to my feet with primal urgency. The pursuit was gaining. The whistling communications had evolved into something like baying, long, continuous calls that reminded me disturbingly of hunting hounds on a scent. Whatever these entities were, they moved through the nighttime forest with a speed and surety I couldn't match. I spotted a fallen tree ahead, a massive trunk creating a natural bridge across a ravine I hadn't noticed in the darkness. Without hesitation, I scrambled onto it and began crossing, arms outstretched for balance on the slippery bark. Halfway across, I heard them reach the edge of the ravine behind me. For the first time, I turned to look directly at my pursuers, illuminated now by the moonlight in the clearing above the ravine. What I saw defies easy description. They appeared human in basic form, bipedal with recognizable limbs and torsos, but their proportions were subtly wrong. Too tall, too thin, with joints that bent at slightly unnatural angles. They wore animal hides and carried crude spears. But it was their faces that seared into my memory. Each wore what I had initially mistaken for masks, animal skulls and preserved heads positioned over their own faces. But as the nearest one tilted its head to study me, I realized with dawning horror that these weren't masks at all. The animal features seemed fused to human faces beneath. Deer antlers growing from human foreheads, wolf jaws extending from human mouths, feathers that emerged directly from skin. I lost my footing on the log bridge, tumbling into the ravine below. The fall was perhaps 15 feet, broken somewhat by thick underbrush, but the impact still drove the air from my lungs. Pain lanced through my right ankle as I struggled to my feet. Above me, the figures conferred in that strange whistling language. Then, with disturbing coordination, they began descending into the ravine from both sides, moving with the fluid grace of predators who know their prey is cornered. Pain shot through my ankle with each step, but adrenaline dulled the worst of it as I limped frantically along the ravine floor. The narrow gully ran roughly southeast, not directly toward the highway, but close enough to my intended direction that following it seemed my best option, with pursuers closing in from above. The ravine deepened as I progressed, its walls rising from 15 to nearly 30 feet. Moonlight barely penetrated this natural trench, forcing me to move by feel along the rocky bottom. Behind me, I could hear my pursuers calling to each other, their whistling communications echoing off the stone walls. After perhaps half a mile, the ravine floor began to fill with water, first ankle deep, then rising rapidly to my knees. I'd stumbled into a drainage channel that was still processing last night's rainfall. The current was gentle but persistent, pushing southeast, the direction I needed to go. A plan formed through the haze of pain and fear. I unclipped my backpack's waist strap and shrugged out of one shoulder, letting the pack hang from my left arm. Using it as a partial flotation device, I eased into the deepening water and allowed the current to carry me forward, kicking occasionally with my good leg to maintain direction. Floating silently through the darkness, I heard the whistling communications grow more urgent, then confused. The sounds began to spread out as my pursuers apparently split up, trying to determine where I'd gone. The water had disguised my trail, giving me a momentary advantage. The ravine continued to deepen, and the water with it. Soon I was fully floating, the current gaining strength as the channel narrowed. My relief at the growing distance from my pursuers was tempered by a new concern. I had no idea where this waterway led, and the increasing speed suggested a potential drop ahead. My fears were confirmed when the sound of rushing water reached my ears, a low roar that grew steadily louder. I frantically tried to reach the sides of the ravine, but the walls were now sheer and slick with moss. The current had become my captor as surely as the entities in the forest had been. The drop, when it came, was mercifully short, perhaps 10 feet into a deep pool below. I plunged beneath the surface, my backpack momentarily dragging me down before its air pockets provided buoyancy. I kicked to the surface, gasping, and managed to paddle to a rocky outcropping at the pool's edge. Hauling myself onto the rocks, I took stock of my situation. My ankle was swollen but not broken, a severe sprain at worst. The backpack had protected most of my gear, though my spare clothes were soaked. The flashlight, wrapped in a waterproof bag, still functioned. Most importantly, the water journey had apparently thrown off pursuit, at least temporarily. According to my watch, it was 4:43 a.m. First light would come in less than an hour. If I could maintain my pace, injured ankle and all, I might reach the highway by mid-morning. I wrung out what clothing I could and repacked my bag. Using a sturdy branch as a makeshift walking stick, I set off through the forest, following my compass southeast toward Salvation. Dawn brought mixed blessings. The growing light made navigation easier, but also made me more visible to anything still hunting me. The forest looked different in daylight, almost mundane compared to the night's terrors, which now seemed increasingly dreamlike and improbable. Had I actually seen what I thought I'd seen? Were those truly humanoid figures with animal features, or had exhaustion and fear distorted my perception of ordinary humans? Perhaps hunters or some isolated community living off the grid? The rational part of my mind sought explanations that wouldn't shatter my understanding of reality. These thoughts occupied me as I limped through the morning forest. My pace was frustratingly slow, each step on my injured ankle a lesson in controlled agony. I estimated I was making perhaps 1 mile per hour, meaning the highway was still several hours away at best. Around 9 a.m., I reached a small clearing and decided to risk a brief rest. My water supply was running low and I needed to check my ankle. Removing my boot revealed ugly purple bruising, but no obvious deformity that would indicate a break. I wrapped it tightly with an elastic bandage from my first aid kit, swallowed 2 ibuprofen, and forced myself to eat a protein bar despite my lack of appetite. That's when I saw it, a crude spiral pattern scratched into the bark of a nearby tree. Fresh marks, the exposed wood still pale and moist. Below the spiral was a horizontal line intersected by 5 vertical marks, like a tally counting to 5. I was on my feet instantly, pain forgotten in a fresh surge of fear. They hadn't lost my trail after all. They were still tracking me, still counting down to... what? I abandoned rest and pushed forward with renewed urgency. Twice more over the next hour I spotted the same marking on trees along my path, each time with one fewer vertical line beneath the spiral. 4, then 3. A countdown tracking my progress toward some predetermined point. By 11 a.m. the forest began to thin. Through gaps in the trees ahead, I could occasionally glimpse what looked like a cleared area, perhaps the highway corridor. Hope surged through me, providing fresh energy despite my exhaustion. I found the next marker carved into a boulder, the spiral with 2 lines beneath it. Whatever the countdown was measuring, I was nearing its conclusion. The highway couldn't be more than half a mile ahead now. I could almost taste freedom. The forest opened onto a steep embankment. Below, perhaps 300 yards away, ran the 2-lane highway I'd been seeking for 2 days. Occasional vehicles sped past, trucks and cars moving too quickly to notice a single figure at the forest's edge. But if I could reach the roadside, I could flag someone down. I began descending the steep slope, using my walking stick for balance and ignoring the protests from my injured ankle. Loose soil and gravel made the going treacherous, but the proximity of rescue drove me forward. Halfway down the embankment, I found the final marker, the spiral with a single line beneath it. It had been pressed into the soft earth of the slope, the impression so fresh that soil was still crumbling at its edges. I froze, scanning the surrounding area. Nothing moved. No birds called. The forest had gone silent again, that same unnatural stillness I'd come to recognize as a warning. The highway was so close. Perhaps 200 yards now. I could see a blue sedan approaching from the east. If I could just reach the roadside before it passed, I abandoned caution and half ran, half slid down the remaining slope, my injured ankle screaming in protest. The sedan was approaching rapidly. I needed to be at the roadside within 30 seconds to catch its attention. The whistling started behind me, that same eerie, almost human sound that had haunted me for 2 nights. Not from the forest this time, but from somewhere on the embankment I'd just descended. I didn't turn to look. The car was almost parallel to my position now. I broke through the final line of undergrowth at the base of the embankment and stumbled onto the grassy verge beside the highway. The sedan was less than 50 yards away. I waved my arms frantically, shouting, though I knew the driver couldn't hear me over the engine and closed windows. The car's brake lights illuminated as the driver noticed my desperate gestures. It began to slow, pulling toward the shoulder. Relief flooded through me so intensely that my knees nearly buckled. As the sedan rolled to a stop 30 yards away, I risked a glance back toward the embankment. There, at the edge of the tree line, stood a solitary figure. Even at this distance and in broad daylight, details were difficult to discern, as if the entity existed in its own pocket of shadow despite the morning sun. But I could clearly see it raise one elongated arm in what might have been a farewell gesture. Then it turned and melted into the forest with fluid grace, visible one moment and gone the next, leaving me with nothing but questions that rational science couldn't answer and memories no one would ever believe. The middle-aged couple in the sedan were vacationing from Ohio. They took in my disheveled appearance, the mud-caked clothing, and the obvious limp with concerned expressions as I approached their vehicle. I must have looked half mad, unshaven, wild-eyed, clothes torn from branches and falls. "You okay, buddy?" the husband asked through his lowered window, wariness competing with concern in his voice. I managed to explain that I was a hiker who had gotten lost and injured my ankle. It was a simplified truth that omitted the unbelievable parts of my ordeal. They offered me a ride to the nearest town, a place called Riverbrook, apparently just 15 miles west. As we drove away, I stared back at the forest edge through the rear window. Nothing moved among the trees, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched until the highway curved and the wilderness disappeared from view. Riverbrook proved to be a small logging community with a single medical clinic. The couple, Jim and Diane Mullins, I learned, insisted on dropping me there before continuing their vacation. I thanked them profusely, aware that their random act of kindness had potentially saved my life. The clinic doctor, a weathered woman in her 50s named Dr. Rivera, confirmed what I'd suspected. A grade 2 ankle sprain that would require several weeks of rest and rehabilitation. While wrapping my ankle properly, she asked what had happened. I gave her the sanitized version. A solo hiking trip gone wrong after getting disoriented in the storm. She nodded sympathetically but fixed me with a penetrating look that suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "You're the third hiker this month who's come out of those woods injured and looking like they've seen a ghost," she remarked casually as she worked. "Something happened out there you're not talking about?" The question hung in the air between us. Part of me desperately wanted to unburden myself, to share the inexplicable events of the past 3 days with someone who might believe me. But what could I possibly say that wouldn't sound delusional? "Just got spooked by being alone out there, I guess," I replied evasively. "The isolation plays tricks on your mind after a while." Dr. Rivera nodded slowly. "Sure does. Especially in that northern section. Local hunters won't go there anymore, you know. Not since the Patterson incident 3 years back." My pulse quickened. "Patterson incident?" She finished wrapping my ankle before responding. "Group of hunters went missing for 2 weeks. Only one came back, Elias Patterson, raving about people who weren't people living in the deep woods. Everyone figured he'd killed the others in some kind of psychotic break." She paused, securing the bandage with metal clips. "They never did find the bodies, though. And Elias, well, he hanged himself in his garage a month later. Left a note saying they found me." A chill ran through me despite the clinic's warmth. Dr. Rivera seemed to be gauging my reaction carefully. When I didn't respond, she continued in a more clinical tone. "Anyway, you should stay off that ankle for at least a week. I can recommend a motel in town if you need a place to recuperate." I accepted her recommendation and spent 5 days in a dated but clean motel on Riverbrook's Main Street. During that time, I tried to process what had happened in those woods. Each night I dreamed of whistling figures with animal features moving through moonlit forests. Each morning I awoke wondering if trauma and isolation had caused me to hallucinate the entire experience. On my 3rd day in Riverbrook, curiosity drove me to the local library, a single-room affair attached to the town hall. The elderly librarian helped me locate local history books and newspaper archives, which I browsed for hours, searching for anything that might contextualize my experience. What I found disturbed me deeply. Over the past 70 years, disappearances in those woods had occurred with statistical improbability. Hikers, hunters, and even a park ranger had vanished without explanation. Most cases were eventually attributed to exposure, wildlife attacks, or accidental falls, but bodies were recovered in less than half of the incidents. More intriguing were the folklore collections, local tales and legends compiled by an amateur ethnographer in the 1950s. Among the standard rural myths about headless horsemen and phantom hitchhikers were stories that resonated uncomfortably with my experience. The older accounts, primarily from early settlers and loggers, spoke of forest people who could take the form of animals or humans with animal features. They were said to mark their territory with stone spirals and to communicate through whistling calls that mimicked birdsong. Most disturbing were the descriptions of their hunting techniques, how they would stalk a victim for days, leaving warnings and counting down until the moment of either killing or release. According to the folklore, those who were pursued but managed to reach the boundary of the forest's sacred land would be allowed to leave, but would forever carry a mark that would draw them back eventually. The entities, called various names by different communities but most commonly skin takers, were neither malevolent nor benevolent by human standards. They operated according to their own inscrutable logic and rules. On my final night in Riverbrook, as I packed my salvaged gear for the bus trip home the following morning, I discovered something in the bottom of my backpack that I hadn't noticed before. Tucked into an interior pocket was a small object wrapped in a scrap of leather. With trembling fingers, I unwrapped it to reveal a small carving made from bone, a perfect spiral identical to the markers I'd seen throughout my ordeal. Turning it over revealed 5 notches carved into the back, the 5th one deeper than the others. I spent hours debating what to do with the object. Part of me wanted to destroy it, to sever any connection to what had happened in those woods. Another part recognized it as evidence that I hadn't imagined the experience, tangible proof of something beyond conventional explanation. In the end, I wrapped it carefully and placed it in my toiletry bag. Whatever it signified, whether warning, trophy, or invitation, it was now part of my story. The bus departed Riverbrook at 9 a.m. the next morning. As we pulled away from the small station, I gazed out the window at the distant tree line where the forest reclaimed the hills beyond town. For a moment, just the briefest flash as sunlight shifted through morning mist, I thought I saw figures standing at the edge of the trees. Tall, unnaturally still figures watching the departing bus with unwavering attention. Then we rounded a bend, and both forest and figures disappeared from view. That was 3 months ago. My ankle has healed, and I've returned to normal life. Work, social obligations, the mundane routines that once seemed so stifling but now represent blessed normalcy. I've told no one the full story of what happened. Who would believe me? Yet something has changed within me. I find myself drawn to windows at night, staring into darkness with inexplicable anticipation. I wake from dreams where whistling calls guide me through moonlit forests, toward some revelation just beyond my understanding. Twice now, I've caught myself unconsciously tracing spiral patterns on foggy mirrors and dusty surfaces. Most disturbing of all is the growing certainty that my encounter in those woods wasn't an ending but a beginning. The bone spiral sits on my bedside table now, no longer hidden away but prominently displayed like a talisman. Sometimes, late at night, I could swear the notches on its reverse side are changing, growing deeper, more defined, as if counting down to something inevitable. 5 notches. 4, 3, 2. I've purchased a new backpack, new hiking boots, new emergency supplies. Maps of the national forest cover my dining room table, with routes marked in red ink that lead deep into the northern wilderness. I tell myself I'm planning this return journey to find answers, to confirm or debunk what I experienced. But in my most honest moments, I recognize the compulsion for what it is. Not a choice, but a summoning. Whatever marked me in those woods is calling me back, and despite every rational warning screaming in my mind, I know I will answer. 1 notch remains. The trailhead sign at Raven Ridge National Forest warned of mountain lion sightings and unpredictable weather, but nothing about what awaited us at higher elevations. It was mid-October 2023, and I had convinced my friends Rob and Mia to join me for a 3-day backpacking trip to summit Mount Corvus. We were all experienced hikers in our early 30s, but this particular trail system was new territory. "Did you see that guy in the ranger station?" Rob asked as we adjusted our packs. Kept staring at us when we mentioned camping near Deadfall Basin. Mia shrugged, probably worried about tourists getting lost. You know how protective locals get about these remote spots. I checked my GPS one last time before we lost signal. Our route would take us 16 miles along increasingly difficult terrain, culminating at Deadfall Basin, a pristine alpine lake seldom visited due to its difficult access. The forecast promised clear skies, though temperatures would drop below freezing at night. The first 5 miles passed uneventfully through dense pine forest. The October air carried that distinct autumn scent, decomposing leaves, fungal earth, and the distant promise of snow. We stopped for lunch at a small clearing where Mia pulled out her camera. "Check this out," she said, reviewing her photos. "What's that behind that tree?" Rob and I leaned in. In the background of her landscape shot, partially obscured by a gnarled pine, was what appeared to be a figure, just a smudge really, possibly a person watching from a distance. "Probably another hiker," I said, though something about the silhouette seemed off, too still, too attentive. We continued our ascent as the trail narrowed and steepened. By late afternoon, we'd gained nearly 3,000 feet of elevation. The forest had thinned, replaced by scrubby vegetation and exposed rock faces. That's when we found the first anomaly, a deer carcass, freshly killed but oddly arranged, splayed in a manner that seemed deliberate, with stones placed around it in a rough circle. "Mountain lion wouldn't do that," Rob whispered. "Neither would a bear," Mia added, stepping closer to me. I examined the scene without touching anything. Someone's messing with us, probably locals who don't want tourists up here. We hurried onward, eager to reach our campsite before dusk. The incident had unsettled us, but rationality prevailed. Hunters and territorial locals weren't uncommon in remote wilderness areas. We made camp in a sheltered ravine 2 miles below Deadfall Basin. As darkness fell, the temperature plummeted. We gathered around our small camp stove, speaking in hushed tones, though there was no one to hear us for miles. That night, I woke to the sound of movement outside my tent. Not the familiar shuffling of nocturnal wildlife, but deliberate footsteps circling our campsite. I lay perfectly still, listening as they completed one circuit, then another. When I finally summoned the courage to unzip my tent, the footsteps retreated into the forest. The moonlight revealed nothing except fresh indentations in the soil, too large for an animal. Distinctly human. I didn't wake Rob or Mia. Instead, I retrieved the hunting knife from my pack and sat awake until dawn, watching the tree line and listening to the wind's low moan through the ravine. Whatever had visited us didn't return, but I couldn't shake the feeling we were under surveillance. Sometime before sunrise, exhaustion claimed me. When I woke, Rob was already brewing coffee. "Found something," he said, his voice flat with concern. He led me 30 yards from camp to a small arrangement of twigs and stones. Another circle, inside which lay 3 small animal bones arranged in a triangle. "Wasn't here yesterday," he continued. "Someone came while we slept." "We should turn back," Mia said, joining us. "This doesn't feel right." I nodded, but something stubborn and prideful kept me from agreeing. "Let's at least reach the basin first. We've come too far to turn around now." Looking back, I recognize that moment as our critical error, the point where curiosity and ego overrode instinct. As we broke camp and continued upward, the clouds gathered above Mount Corvus, and something watched us from the shadows, calculating its approach. Deadfall Basin revealed itself around midday, a pristine alpine lake nestled in a natural amphitheater of jagged stone. Under different circumstances, I would have marveled at its beauty. Instead, I found myself scanning the ridgelines for movement, checking over my shoulder with each gust of wind. "This place is incredible," Mia whispered, as if normal volume might disturb something. She pointed toward a cluster of ancient-looking structures on the far side. "Look at those cairns." Rob pulled out his binoculars. "Those aren't cairns. Too organized." He passed me the binoculars and I focused on the stone formations. They were indeed deliberate, standing stones arranged in concentric circles with what appeared to be a crude altar at the center. "Native American site?" I suggested, though I knew indigenous cultures from this region didn't typically build such formations. "Let's check it out," Mia said, already adjusting her pack. We skirted the lake's edge, keeping to the rocky shore rather than the more direct path through the sparse tree line. The stones grew more imposing as we approached, some standing nearly 6 feet tall, others laid horizontally like tables. The arrangement spoke of purpose, of ritual. "This isn't on any archaeological register," Rob said, examining the lichens that partially covered the stones. "Some of these have been moved recently. The growth patterns are disturbed." I bent to examine the central altar, a flat stone slab stained with dark patches. A nauseating realization hit me. The stains were blood, some of it still tacky to the touch. "Recent animal sacrifice," I said quietly. "Less than 24 hours old." Mia backed away. "We need to go now." That's when we heard it, a sound like nothing I've ever encountered before or since. A guttural, multi-toned wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. It wasn't animal, wasn't human, but something horrifically in between. Rob grabbed my arm. "Run." We fled back toward our intended campsite, a sheltered cove on the lake's southern shore. None of us spoke as we hastily erected our tents. The sun was still high, but the temperature had dropped precipitously, our breath visible in the alpine air. "What was that sound?" Mia finally asked as we huddled together. "Wind through the rock formations," I suggested, not believing it myself. "Creates weird acoustics." Rob shook his head. "That wasn't wind." As daylight faded, we built a larger fire than was strictly necessary, feeding it compulsively. I kept thinking about the fresh blood on that altar stone, about the circles of twigs left outside our previous camp, about the footsteps in the night. "There's a local legend," Rob said suddenly, feeding another branch to the flames. "Something I read while researching this trip but dismissed as tourist trap nonsense. They call it the Guardian of Corvus." Mia leaned forward. "What kind of guardian?" "According to the stories, it was once human, a member of a hunting party that got stranded here during a brutal winter in the 1800s. When they were found in spring, all but one had been cannibalized. The survivor lived as a hermit in these mountains for decades afterward, but locals claimed he'd become something else, something that wore animal skins and mimicked human voices to lure hikers to their deaths. "That's just a campfire story," I said with forced conviction. The fire popped loudly, sending sparks skyward. In that momentary distraction, we all heard it, the snap of a branch from the darkness beyond our camp. Rob grabbed the flashlight, aiming its beam into the trees. For a split second, the light caught a flash of movement, something low to the ground that retreated from the illumination. "Probably a fox," I said. We took watches that night in 2-hour shifts. Mine was last from 4 a.m. until dawn. The forest remained utterly silent. No insects, no night birds, no rustling of small animals. Just absolute stillness punctuated by the occasional crack of our dying fire. The attack, when it came, was calculated for maximum terror. At approximately 5:30 a.m., as the eastern sky began to lighten, I heard Rob's voice from beyond our camp perimeter. "Hey, come look at this!" I knew immediately that Rob was still asleep in his tent, yet the voice was undeniably his, every inflection perfect. Before I could shout a warning, Mia emerged from her tent bleary-eyed. "Was that Rob?" she asked. "Get back in your tent," I hissed, grabbing the hunting knife from my belt. "Guys, seriously, you need to see this," Rob's voice called again, this time from a different location in the darkness. The real Rob unzipped his tent, confusion evident on his face. "Who's calling me?" That's when we saw it at the edge of our dying firelight. A figure standing upright but contorted in a way no human body should bend. It wore what appeared to be animal hide stitched together, its face obscured by deep shadow. When it realized we were all awakened together, it dropped to all fours with unnatural fluidity and vanished into the underbrush. We didn't wait for dawn. We packed only the essentials and began our descent in near darkness, headlamps illuminating just enough trail to keep us from plummeting off the mountain. None of us spoke of what we'd seen. To articulate it would make it more real somehow. The trail down from Deadfall Basin was treacherous even in daylight. In the gray pre-dawn, with fear driving our every step, it became a nightmare of loose shale and hidden drop-offs. We abandoned any pretense of proper hiking technique, half-sliding down steep portions, using trees as brakes when momentum threatened to send us over edges. "It's following us," Mia whispered about an hour into our descent. I glanced back up the switchbacks we'd just navigated. Through gaps in the tree cover, I caught glimpses of movement, something paralleling our route but staying just out of clear sight. "We need to separate," Rob suggested, his voice tight with controlled panic. "It can't follow all of us." "No," I said firmly. "That's exactly what it wants. We stay together, keep moving, and make it to the ranger station." The sun finally crested the eastern ridge, flooding the mountainside with pale October light. The newfound visibility should have been comforting, but instead it revealed the extent of our isolation. Miles of wilderness in every direction, with the ranger station at least 8 hours away at our current pace. Around mid-morning, we stopped briefly to refill water bottles at a stream crossing. That's when we discovered the first sign that our situation was worse than we'd imagined. Fresh tracks in the mud, not following us from behind, but cutting across our path from ahead. "It's circling us," Rob said, examining the impressions. "These look human, but the gait is wrong. Too long between steps." "We need to keep moving," I urged, unable to shake the sensation of being watched from multiple directions. By noon, the weather turned against us. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, bringing with them a biting wind and the first spitting drops of cold rain. The temperature plummeted and our sweat-soaked clothes became liabilities. We needed shelter, but the thought of stopping, of becoming stationary targets, was unthinkable. The rain increased to a downpour as we navigated a particularly exposed section of trail that skirted a steep drop-off. The path, now slick with mud and running water, narrowed to barely a foot wide in places. We moved single file, Rob leading, Mia in the middle, and me bringing up the rear. I heard Mia scream before I saw what happened. A section of trail had given way beneath Rob's feet, sending him sliding toward the edge. He managed to catch himself on an exposed root, but now hung precariously over a 40-foot drop to jagged rocks below. "Hold on," I shouted, dropping to my stomach to distribute weight on the unstable ground. I extended my hiking pole toward him. "Grab this." Rob reached for the pole, his fingers just brushing the handle when we all heard it. That same guttural, multi-toned wail from Deadfall Basin, now much closer. From my vantage point, I could see what Rob and Mia couldn't. A figure moving rapidly through the trees below, heading toward the spot where Rob would land if he fell. "Something's coming," I said through gritted teeth. Rob, you need to grab this now. With desperate strength, Rob lunged for the pole and caught it. Mia and I braced ourselves against a boulder and pulled. His fingers clawed at the muddy trail edge, finding purchase just as the root he'd been hanging from tore free. We dragged him to safety and immediately resumed our descent, no longer concerned with stealth or conserving energy, just pure survival instinct driving us forward. The rain intensified, reducing visibility to mere yards. Lightning split the sky, followed by deafening thunder that seemed to shake the very mountain. In that illumination, I glimpsed something that still haunts my dreams. Our pursuer, no longer bothering to hide, loping down the slope parallel to us on all fours like an animal, yet with the unmistakable silhouette of a human wearing what appeared to be a deer skull as a helmet or mask. Don't look at it, I warned when Mia turned toward my line of sight. Just keep moving. By mid-afternoon, we reached the forest zone again, dense pines offering some shelter from the rain but limiting our visibility further. The trail forked, with the main path continuing its gradual descent while a narrower track plunged more directly down the mountainside. Shortcut, Rob gasped, pointing to the steeper path. Cuts at least 2 miles. Could be a trap, Mia cautioned. If it knows these mountains better than we do. We don't have a choice, I said, checking my watch. Darkness in 3 hours. We need to be off this mountain by then. We took the shortcut, a decision that nearly cost us everything. The trail quickly deteriorated into little more than a game path, overgrown and treacherous. After half a mile, it vanished completely, leaving us stranded in dense forest with only our compasses to guide us. We need to find the main trail again, Rob insisted, but the driving rain and darkening sky made navigation nearly impossible. That's when we heard it. Rob's voice again, but from 50 yards away through the trees. Guys, over here, I found the trail. The real Rob grabbed my arm. It's mimicking me again. Then Mia's voice called from another direction. Help! I'm hurt. Mia pressed herself against a tree trunk, eyes wide with terror as her own voice called out again. Please, I need help. I dug in my pack and distributed our last remaining weapons, a canister of bear spray for Rob, my hunting knife for Mia, while I kept the hatchet we'd used for firewood. Back to back, I ordered. Whatever happens, we stay together. The voices multiplied. My voice, Rob's, Mia's, calling from all directions, some pleading for help, others offering safety, all designed to separate us. Then abruptly, silence fell except for the drumming of rain on leaves. In that moment of quiet, I made a decision that saved our lives. We're going straight downhill. Not on any path, just the most direct route off this mountain. Now. We abandoned any pretense of following trails and simply descended as rapidly as safety allowed, using trees and rocks as handholds, sliding down steep sections on our backsides. The rain finally slackened, but darkness approached with frightening speed. What is that thing? Mia asked during a brief pause to get our bearings. Some kind of mountain hunter, I replied, checking my compass again. Probably lived up here for years, gone completely feral. No normal human moves like that, Rob countered, scanning the forest behind us. Or mimics voices that perfectly. I had no answer that made sense. The rational part of my brain suggested an unhinged survivalist with exceptional tracking skills, and perhaps a talent for ventriloquism or voice imitation. But what we'd seen, the inhuman movements, the animal hides, the ritualistic arrangements, suggested something more primitive and terrifying. We pressed onward as true night fell. Our headlamps carved narrow tunnels of visibility in the absolute darkness of the wilderness. Every shadow concealed potential threats. Every sound triggered fight-or-flight responses. Listen, Rob whispered suddenly, raising his hand. We froze, straining to hear over our pounding heartbeats. At first nothing, then unmistakable the sound of a vehicle engine, distant but clear. The forest access road, I said, hope surging. Can't be more than a mile. That hope died moments later when we reached the edge of a ravine, 30 feet deep with a fast-moving stream at the bottom, swollen by the day's rainfall. The road lay beyond it, tantalizingly close but separated by this final obstacle. We have to find a crossing point, Mia said, her headlamp beam following the ravine's edge. No time, Rob replied, pointing behind us. Our lights revealed nothing. But we all sensed it, our pursuer, closing the distance, herding us toward this final trap. I spotted a fallen tree about 50 yards downstream that spanned most of the ravine's width. There. It's our only chance. The log crossing was perilous, wet, partially rotted, and ending several feet shy of the opposite bank. One by one, we inched across, balancing with arms outstretched. Rob went first, then Mia. I brought up the rear, constantly glancing behind. Rob and Mia made it across, leaping the final gap to safety. As I neared the midpoint of the log, a sound froze me in place, the distinct crack of breaking wood. "Don't move," Rob called. "It's giving way." I had only seconds to decide. Try to run the remaining distance, likely causing the log to break completely, or proceed with agonizing slowness and risk being caught from behind. The decision was made for me when my headlamp caught movement at the log's entrance. A dark figure on all fours, poised to cross after me. "It's here," I called, my voice barely functioning. "I'm going to run for it. Wait," Mia shouted, but I was already moving. The log groaned and shifted beneath me. I heard splintering, felt the surface tilt, and then I was airborne, leaping with every ounce of strength toward the opposite bank. My chest hit the edge, hands clawing for purchase in the mud. For one horrible moment, I felt myself sliding backward toward the ravine. Then Rob and Mia had me, dragging me upward to safety just as the log gave way completely, crashing into the stream below with a tremendous splash. We didn't wait to see what our pursuer would do next. We ran through the forest toward the sound of engines, no longer caring about noise or stealth. After what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, we burst from the tree line onto the gravel forest access road, directly in front of a surprised Forest Service truck. The ranger inside had been patrolling for stranded hikers after the storm. He took in our mud-covered, wild-eyed appearance with professional calm and quickly ushered us into his vehicle. As we pulled away, I looked back toward the forest edge. For an instant, my eyes met those of our pursuer, now standing upright at the tree line, partially concealed but watching intently. In the truck's taillights, I saw it reach up and remove what I had thought was a deer skull helmet, revealing a gaunt, human face beneath, pale and grotesquely painted with what looked like mud and blood. The ranger, following my gaze, saw nothing. By the time he aimed his spotlight, the figure had vanished into the darkness. My name is George Thompson, and I am 62 years old. This is a true story of what happened to me in September of 1994. I've been a National Park Ranger stationed in the Appalachian Mountains, Blue Ridge Parkway to be exact, for longer than I care to remember. My old man was a ranger too, the best kind. I kinda grew up in these forests, learning their secrets, respecting their power, but nothing in all my years could have prepared me for what I encountered that fall. It started subtly, barely noticeable, like a shift in the breeze. Rangers began reporting hikers going missing. No bodies, no signs of struggle. They just vanished off the trails. At first, we blamed it on folks getting lost or disoriented. It happens sometimes, especially with city folk who underestimate the wilderness. But deep down, I felt there was something more, like a chill wind coming from a place you couldn't see. Then came the stories from other rangers out on night patrol. They'd claimed to hear footsteps in the underbrush when they were out alone, feel like they were being followed despite the silence. One old-timer, a guy named Flynn, even said he swore he saw eyes. Big, glowing yellow eyes peering back at him from the tree line, disappearing in a blink. The higher-ups laughed it off. Stress, they said. Maybe bad moonshine. But I knew Flynn. He wasn't the type to spook easy or tell tall tales. Something was out there, something that didn't belong. As the weeks passed, the atmosphere in the park grew tenser. Visitors became scarce, spooked by the rumors that had begun to circulate. Even the wildlife seemed on edge. I'd been a ranger long enough to read the signs of the forest, and everything was telling me to be on guard. One evening in late September, I was closing up a section of the parkway when I stumbled on it myself, the cause for all the unsettling stories. Deep in the woods, off a little-used maintenance trail, I found a clearing, and in the center of it, bones, piles of them, gnawed and cracked. At first glance, it looked like the remains of deer, maybe a bear. But as I got closer, my blood ran cold. Mixed in were bones too big, too oddly shaped to be just animals, and scattered amongst the animal remains, torn bits of clothing, a mangled backpack. My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't natural. Not normal at all. I'd seen plenty of predator kills in my time, but nothing like this. The sheer volume of bones, the way they were arranged, it was almost ritualistic. Right then, my radio crackled with Flynn's voice, panicked. He said he was out on the trail, said he saw it, the thing that was making those eyes. Then the audio cut out, leaving nothing but static. I ran. Every instinct told me to go back, get help. But Flynn had been like family to me, and my gut said he was in trouble. Night was falling fast as I followed the trail towards the spot he'd radioed in from. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No chirping of insects, no rustling of small animals. It was as if the entire woods were holding its breath. The only sound was my own heavy breathing and the crunch of leaves under my boots. As I reached the edge of the woods, peering into an overgrown meadow, I saw it. In the waning light, it stood there, the creature. I couldn't make out all the details, but the sheer scale of it was enough to make my knees wobble. It was close to 10 feet tall, covered in matted fur that shimmered silver in the moonlight. Its arms were like tree trunks, its hands tipped with claws that ripped into the earth. And the head, that was the worst. A mix of wolf and man, twisted and wrong, with yellow eyes blazing like hellfire. For a heartbeat, we just stood there, frozen. Then it let out a roar that echoed through the mountains, the raw sound of fury and hunger. Flynn cried out from somewhere in the meadow, his voice filled with pain and terror. That snapped me into action. I charged forward, yelling, trying to draw the creature away from wherever Flynn was. It turned, and in the dim light its teeth flashed in a grotesque grin. I heard Flynn scream again, and the sound cut off abruptly. The creature turned back towards me, and for a second I thought about running. But Flynn was out there, maybe even still alive. And that creature wasn't going to let me go without a fight. My heart was a drumbeat in my ears as I raised my rifle. It was more of an act of defiance than actual strategy. I hadn't even reloaded since firing warning shots at a mama bear a few weeks back. This thing, bullets wouldn't even slow it down. Yet I aimed. The creature stalked closer, its eyes fixated on me. I squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed, useless. It roared and lunged. I braced myself for impact, closing my eyes and waiting for the end. But then, silence. My eyes flew open. The creature had stopped just feet in front of me, its massive form frozen in mid-pounce. Confused, I scrambled back, then noticed what had stopped it in its tracks. A flickering headlamp was bobbing through the trees. Then a voice, gruff and familiar. "Don't move, that thing hates light." It was Old Man Flynn, battered and bleeding, but miraculously alive. He dragged himself into view, one hand clutching the headlamp, the other an old, heavy-duty flashlight. As he got closer, the creature hissed and retreated a few steps, its eyes narrowing against the concentrated beams. "Keep those lights on it," Flynn croaked, his face pale. "Come on, move." I didn't need telling twice. Stumbling to my feet, I shuffled towards Flynn. The creature watched, snarling, but the fearsome predator from before seemed held at bay by the harsh light, unable to approach. Flynn collapsed against a tree, and I knelt beside him. His leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, the bone jutting through torn skin. "Hold this!" He thrust the heavy flashlight at me. "Aim it straight at that thing." With shaking hands, I took the flashlight. Its beam seemed to make the creature agitated, keeping it at a distance as I helped Flynn splint his leg, fashioning a makeshift support from branches. The whole time we kept those lights trained on the predator, its snarls filling the night. When the makeshift splint was secured, Flynn slumped back, exhausted. "They told me I was crazy," he rasped, a dark chuckle rasping in his throat. "Said it was bears, wild cats. Never believed they'd believe this." Suddenly, the creature charged again, a blur of dark fur and aggression. We both screamed, holding the light steady. It stopped short as if hitting an invisible wall. Then it paced back and forth, watching us with calculating eyes. "Can't hold it forever," Flynn muttered. "Sun's coming up soon, but..." He trailed off, grimacing. We both knew what that meant. We'd be sitting ducks come daylight. That's when I saw it. The fire lookout tower flashing on a distant ridge, an old beacon hardly ever used anymore. Maybe, just maybe, I laid out my plan to Flynn, a desperate gamble at best. He nodded slowly, wincing as he shifted his injured leg. "Crazy enough to work," he grunted. With Flynn providing cover, keeping the creature pinned with the flashlights, I crept backwards into the undergrowth. I had to get to the base of the tower unseen if this had any chance. Inch by painful inch I moved, the creature pacing restlessly as it sensed me pulling away. Then I was free of its sightline, scrambling towards the tower on my belly. The base of the tower was an old metal shed filled with outdated equipment and forgotten maps. Inside I struck gold, flares. I grabbed them, heart pounding, then began the terrifying climb up the narrow ladder of the tower. The creature must have sensed the change of elevation because it roared in frustration, scrabbling against the base of the tower as I reached the top. I secured myself, hardened my throat and fumbled with the flare. Flickering crimson light sparked to life, and with a prayer I hurled it down. The flare bounced off a rock near the creature and exploded. It screeched, recoiling from the blinding flash. Encouraged, I lit another and another, tossing them into the clearing. The creature thrashed and howled, clearly in pain from the sudden bursts of light. I didn't stop, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the last flare. And then as dawn broke, the creature turned and fled, disappearing into the forest with astonishing speed. When the search team finally arrived, we told them the unbelievable truth. They found footprints larger than any bear, the clearing littered with bones. Whatever that creature was, it was still out there. The aftermath was a blur. Flynn recovered, though he walked with a limp for the rest of his days. I never saw the creature again, but I feel it sometimes. A prickling at the back of my neck. That lingering sense of being watched from the encroaching darkness of the trees. We got transferred, both of us. I moved on. Got a desk job pushing paper instead of patrolling trails. Safer, they said, maybe, but sometimes, in the dead quiet of my office, I swear I can smell the rankness of the woods, hear the echoing roar, and feel the heat of those burning yellow eyes fixed on me in the deep, unending dark. The official report chalked it up to a rogue bear, maybe rabid. But Flynn and I, we know the truth. There's something out there in those mountains, something old, something hungry. And God help anyone who stumbles across its path. I'm telling this story now because I'm not getting any younger. People need to know, need to be prepared. If you're ever hiking in the Blue Ridge Mountains and you feel that chill wind, hear those footsteps when there's nothing there, don't hesitate, run. Run as fast as you can, and pray it isn't already too late. Because in those ancient forests, where the shadows run deep and the night seems to last forever, there are things that defy explanation. Things that remind us that we're not the top of the food chain, and sometimes, just sometimes, those things decide to remind us just how small and vulnerable we really are. So next time you're out in the wilderness, enjoying the beauty of nature, remember my story. Keep your wits about you, your flashlight close, and maybe, just maybe, you'll make it out alive if you ever encounter the creature that haunts the Appalachians. My name is Edward Johnson, and I am 66 years old. This is the story of an event that changed my life forever. An encounter that took place in October 2011 in a place I thought I knew like the back of my hand, the Redwood National and State Parks in California. For 8 years, I worked as a ranger in those majestic forests. Some called me a park veteran, and the job had gotten into my blood. The crisp air, the towering trees, the sound of the creek, it was my kind of paradise. I wasn't about to quit anytime soon. That fateful day started like any other. I laced up my boots, grabbed my gear, and headed out for my usual patrol route. It was a clear autumn morning, the first leaves starting to paint the forest floor in golds and reds. But something felt off. The forest, usually alive with birdsong and the chattering of small creatures, was unnervingly quiet. As I hiked deeper into the woods, an unsettling feeling crept over me. It was as if something was watching me, following my every move. The sensation only intensified as the day wore on. Then I saw it, a sight so bizarre that my mind struggled to process it. A deer carcass, torn open and half devoured, hung from the branches of a tree at a height no predator I knew could reach. As I approached to examine it, a wave of nausea washed over me. The slashes and tears on the animal looked surgical, calculated as if something methodical had done this. "What the hell are you?" I muttered under my breath, scanning the surrounding trees. My heart pounded in my chest as I spotted a flicker of movement, then a pair of glowing eyes staring down at me. They looked almost human, but far too large. What confronted me from the treetops was massive, far bigger than any human, with impossibly long, thin limbs. Its skin was dark, textured like rough bark. The thing tilted its head at an unnatural angle, and then in a blink it was gone, vanished into the canopy. Panicked, I radioed for backup. stammering out a bewildered description of the creature. Ranger Dispatch sounded amused, probably thinking I'd finally cracked under the strain of the job. But then I heard my partner Ilara shouting over the radio. She was further down the trail, her voice panicked. "Killian, I found something. You need to get here fast. It's bad. Really bad." A sickening dread pooled in my stomach as I raced to her location. What I saw made me question my own sanity. A hiker lay sprawled on the ground, his body torn and twisted at impossible angles. There were the same methodical marks on him that I'd seen on the deer, a kind of calculated brutality that made me want to retch. Before I could process the horror of this scene, a scream tore through the trees. I bolted after the sound, Ilara trailing behind. Branches whipped at my face and roots snagged at my feet, but fear propelled me forward. When I reached a clearing, my blood turned to ice. Ilara was trapped. The creature had her pinned to the ground, one massive hand clamped over her mouth. Its other hand hovered inches from her throat, long claws glinting in the dappled sunlight. Its eyes burned with an intelligence that was both eerie and terrifying. We locked eyes, and for a frozen moment I swear it paused, as though trying to read my intentions. Then, with a speed that defied its size, it grabbed Ilara and vanished back into the dense foliage. I collapsed to my knees, a strangled sob escaping my throat. My mind raced. Was this some kind of freak of nature? An undiscovered species? Or something else, something far more sinister? I knew no animal, no person could have done this. The woods that were once my sanctuary had become a nightmare, and whatever lurked in those trees had broken something fundamental inside me. When backup finally arrived, I looked like a madman babbling about monsters and eyes in the trees. They sedated me, and when I woke up they were chalking it up to stress, maybe even a bear attack. Despite extensive searches, no trace of Ilara or the creature was ever recovered, leaving an open wound in our tight-knit ranger community. I resigned from my position a few weeks later. I tried to explain what I saw, but my words sounded hollow even to my own ears. The incident haunted me. The carnage, Ilara's terrified eyes, the creature's unnatural intelligence. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just prey in this equation. I was being studied. The experience tore me from the wilderness I once loved and left me with an unshakable fear that lingers to this day. I tell this story now not for sympathy or to seek validation. Frankly, I don't expect anyone to believe me. But I can no longer stay silent. Something inhuman dwells in those woods, and it will strike again. It's only a matter of time. In the decade that followed, I couldn't settle. I moved constantly from one anonymous city to the next, the paranoia gnawing at me like a persistent hunger. I tried therapy, support groups, even medication. Nothing could banish the chilling memory of those glowing eyes and the feeling of being watched. I became a shadow of myself, a husk driven by a constant, irrational dread. Then the reports began. At first, it was just whispers, hushed rumors among park rangers in Oregon and Washington. Disappearances, animal mutilations bearing the same methodical marks I'd seen years earlier. My heart pounded in my chest. It was back. No one connected the dots except for me. These incidents were treated as separate tragedies, freak accidents. I knew better. I felt sick with guilt and helplessness. Desperate, I tried to warn others, but it only fueled the perception that I was unhinged. My frantic stories about the creature only confirmed what everyone already suspected. The ordeal in the woods had shattered me. No one listened, and more lives were lost. I became an outcast and a cautionary tale. One night, an old colleague, Simon, reached out. I hadn't spoken to him since the Redwood incident. His voice on the phone was grim. "Killian, people are dying out here. Rangers, hikers. It's like you said. You need to come back." With heavy reluctance, I found myself on a backcountry trail in Washington's Olympic National Park. The air carried the same damp smell of earth and pine needles that filled my nightmares. Simon, visibly shaken, filled me in. Over the previous weeks, 3 hikers had vanished and 2 rangers were found brutally murdered, bearing the familiar, terrifying wounds. The hunt began. We moved through the ancient forest, our senses on high alert. Simon knew I hadn't made up what I saw. My insistence, my unwavering fear had slowly swayed him to the terrible truth. We were days deep into the wilderness, the dread hanging heavier with each passing night. Then came the sighting. It flickered across the trail, a hulking silhouette moving against the moonlight. We exchanged a terrified glance and took off in pursuit. The creature was fast, impossibly fast. its long limbs propelling it through the dense undergrowth at unnatural speeds. Twigs snapped and leaves rustled, but it was eerily silent. It led us deeper into the forest, into an area even Simon had never ventured into. Finally, we emerged into a hidden clearing dimly lit by the moon. In the center of the clearing stood a tree far more massive than any I'd ever seen. At its base were remnants, clothing, backpacks, bones, all stained with dark, dried blood. The sight turned my stomach. This was its lair, a gruesome trophy case. A low growl broke the silence, and the creature stepped out from the shadows. This time I saw it clearly, all 7 feet of it, the impossibly long claws, the dark, leathery skin. But it was the eyes that chilled me to the bone, glowing pools of malevolence. Fear and fury surged within me, a desperate need to avenge Alara, those who died, and the shattered remains of my own life. I raised my rifle, my hands shaking. Simon squeezed my shoulder, and with a grim nod he drew his own weapon. Shots rang out, echoing through the clearing. The creature let out a guttural roar, but it didn't falter. It charged, its movements a blur of limbs and claws. We fired again and again, the desperation giving us an edge. I swore I saw the creature stumble, but it didn't fall. Suddenly, Simon screamed. He was on the ground, one massive hand wrapped around his leg, dragging him relentlessly toward the massive tree. I sprinted to his side, but the creature moved with blinding speed. With a sickening crunch, it snapped Simon's leg like a brittle branch, and his horrified screams cut through the night. I was next. A giant hand closed around my torso, lifting me off the ground, and the gun clattered uselessly away. Its rancid breath washed over me as I stared into its fathomless eyes, and the last thing I saw was the unnatural bend of its arm as it brought one impossibly long claw closer. Then darkness. The aftermath is a blur. I woke up in a hospital bed, battered, bandaged, but alive. The official report called it an encounter with a rogue bear, but the disbelieving look in the doctor's eyes suggested he knew better. The story made headlines, stirring the same fascination and doubt that followed me from Redwood. I never went back to the woods. Instead, I exist in the purgatory of populated spaces, the cities and crowds I once avoided. Sometimes in the dead of night, I wake in a cold sweat and see the creature, its glowing eyes boring into my soul. I know in those moments that I haven't escaped it. Not really. It's still out there. A patient hunter waiting for the next opportunity, the next victim, and I'm powerless to stop it. My name is Charles Robinson. What I'm about to tell you happened to me in September of 2010, but the memory of it is as fresh as if it were yesterday. I worked as a backcountry ranger in Glacier National Park, Montana. It's about as wild and rugged a place as you can find in the lower 48. I'd seen my share of grizzlies and mountain lions over the years, but those encounters were straightforward, predictable. What I faced back then, there's no guidebook for that. The call came in on a crisp autumn morning. The air had that particular bite to it, hinting at the winter to come. I was in the ranger station, going through my usual morning routine, checking weather reports, trail conditions, and any overnight incident logs. The radio crackled to life, breaking the quiet. "Base, this is dispatch. We've got a report of a missing hiker near Iceberg Lake. Group of 5, one member unaccounted for since yesterday afternoon. Over." I grabbed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Robinson." I copy. "Any more details?" "Over." "Negative, Ranger. Group's pretty shaken up. They're waiting at the Iceberg Lake trailhead. Ranger Hayes is already en route to meet you there." "Over." 10-4, dispatch. "I'm heading out now." "Over and out." I quickly gathered my gear. First aid kit, extra water, emergency rations, and my trusty 30-06 rifle. In bear country, you never leave without it. As I headed out to my truck, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Missing hikers weren't uncommon, but something about this call felt different. The drive to the trailhead took about an hour. The road wound through towering pines and past crystal-clear streams. On any other day, I would have marveled at the beauty. Today, my mind was focused on the task at hand. I pulled into the parking lot and saw Amelia Hayes, my partner for this operation, already talking to a group of visibly distressed hikers. Amelia was relatively new to the job, but she had good instincts and a level head. I grabbed my pack and joined them. "Charles," Amelia nodded as I approached. "This is Mike, Sarah, Tom, and Lisa. Their friend John has been missing since yesterday afternoon." I looked at the group. They were in their mid-20s, dressed in decent hiking gear, but with the slightly overwhelmed look of city folks out of their element. "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" I asked. Mike, a tall guy with a scraggly beard, spoke up. We were about 2 miles past Iceberg Lake, exploring some of the unmarked trails. John was a little ahead of us, maybe 50 yards. He went around a bend in the path and then... Mike's voice cracked. Sarah, a petite blonde with red-rimmed eyes, continued. We heard this in sound, not quite a scream, not quite a growl. Then John yelled, "Just once!" By the time we got around the bend, he was gone. Just gone. "Did you see any signs of what might have taken him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and professional. Tom, a stocky guy with glasses, shook his head. It happened so fast. We saw some disturbed underbrush, maybe a flash of movement deeper in the woods, but nothing clear. I exchanged a glance with Amelia. This wasn't sounding like a typical bear attack or a hiker simply getting lost. "Did you notice anything unusual in the area before John disappeared? Any strange noises, smells, tracks?" The group looked at each other uneasily. Finally, Lisa, a tall woman with long dark hair, spoke up. "There was something off about the woods there. It was too quiet. No bird sounds, no squirrels. And there was this smell like rotting meat, but also something else. Something I can't describe." I nodded, trying not to let my growing concern show on my face. "All right, here's what we're going to do. Amelia and I are going to head up the trail and see if we can find any sign of John. I need you all to stay here. If we're not back in 4 hours, use the emergency radio in my truck to call for backup." "Understood?" They nodded, looking relieved to have professionals taking over. As Amelia and I started up the trail, I could feel their eyes on our backs, full of hope and fear. The hike to Iceberg Lake was beautiful but tense. Neither of us spoke much, our senses on high alert for any sign of trouble. The lake itself was a stunning sight, a sheet of turquoise water surrounded by towering cliffs. But we didn't have time to admire the view. We pushed on past the lake, following the faint trail the hikers had described. About 2 miles in, we started to notice changes. The forest grew denser, the underbrush thicker. And it was quiet. Too quiet. "Charles," Amelia whispered, "do you smell that?" I nodded grimly. The air had taken on a foul odor, just as Lisa had described. Like decay, but with an underlying scent that made my skin crawl. We pressed on, moving slowly, our eyes scanning the woods around us. That's when we found the first sign of John. A scrap of cloth, caught on a thorny bush. It was stained with what could only be blood. Amelia bagged it as evidence, her hands shaking slightly. We followed a trail of broken branches and disturbed earth. Whatever had taken John, it was big. And it hadn't been subtle about its passage. The trail led us deeper into the woods, away from any marked paths. As the day wore on, the forest seemed to close in around us. The towering pines blocked out most of the sunlight, creating an eerie twilight. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle of leaves made us jump. "Charles," Amelia said, her voice tense, "what do you think we're dealing with here? This doesn't feel like any animal attack I've ever seen." I shook my head. "I don't know, Amelia. In all my years as a ranger, I've never seen anything like this. But whatever it is, we need to find it before it hurts anyone else." We pushed on, the sense of wrongness growing with each step. The smell was getting stronger, and now there was something else. A sound just at the edge of hearing, like breathing, but wrong. Too deep, too rhythmic for any animal I knew. As we rounded a bend in our makeshift trail, we came upon a clearing. What we saw there will haunt me for the rest of my days. In the center of the clearing was a crude structure, like a nest made of broken branches and bones. Animal bones. Mostly, but some looked disturbingly human, and there, half buried in the nest, was a backpack. John's backpack. Amelia started forward, but I grabbed her arm. "Wait," I whispered. "Look." At the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the shadows, was something. It was tall, much taller than a man, with limbs that seemed too long, too jointed. Its skin was a mottled gray-green like the moss on the trees around us, and its eyes, God, its eyes. They glowed a sickly yellow-green in the gloom, fixed right on us. For a moment, everything was still. Then the creature moved, faster than anything that size had a right to. It lunged across the clearing, those impossibly long arms reaching for us. I shoved Amelia to one side and dove the other way, bringing my rifle up as I rolled. I fired, the sound deafening in the quiet forest. The creature shrieked, a sound that made my bones vibrate, and stumbled back. "Run!" I yelled to Amelia. We took off, crashing through the underbrush. I could hear the creature behind us, its inhuman shrieks echoing through the trees. We ran until our lungs burned, until our legs felt like lead. Finally, we burst out onto the main trail, nearly colliding with a group of startled hikers. "Call for backup," I gasped, gesturing wildly at their satellite phone. "Emergency!" As one of the hikers made the call, Amelia and I turned to face the woods, our weapons ready. But the creature didn't emerge. The forest was silent once more. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Park rangers and local law enforcement swarmed the area. Search parties were organized. But despite an extensive search, no trace of John was ever found. And the creature? Well, the official report chalked it up to a bear attack. Said Amelia and I had been confused, stressed, seeing things that weren't there. But I know what I saw. That thing in the woods, it wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything natural. And sometimes late at night, I swear I can hear that breathing again, just outside my window. That deep rhythmic sound that's almost but not quite human. I retired from the Park Service not long after that incident. Couldn't handle the skeptical looks, the whispers behind my back. Moved down to Arizona. Took up a job as a tour guide in the desert. It's safer here mostly. No dark forests, no deep shadows for things to hide in. But I can't forget. And I can't shake the feeling that someday, somehow I'll see those glowing eyes again. So I keep my rifle clean and loaded, just in case. Because out there in the wild places, in the deep woods and high mountains, there are things that defy explanation. Things that hunt in the shadows, that prey on the unwary. And all the training in the world can't prepare you for the moment when you realize that you're not the top of the food chain anymore. So if you're ever out in the backcountry, and the forest goes quiet and you catch a whiff of something rotting on the wind, don't investigate. Don't try to be a hero, just run. Run and don't look back. Because there are some things in this world that man was never meant to face. And once you've seen them, you can never unsee them. This is Charles Robinson, former backcountry ranger of Glacier National Park, signing off. Stay safe out there, folks. And always remember, in the wild, you're not always the hunter. Sometimes you're the prey. My name is Harold Carter, and I am 74 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened to me on July 22, 1997. It was my third year working as a park ranger in Yellowstone National Park, and it changed my life forever. I love everything about being a park ranger. The towering trees that have stood sentinel for centuries, the diverse wildlife that roams freely through the vast wilderness, and those geysers that never fail to impress. It's my kind of paradise. Yellowstone has a raw, untamed beauty that never ceases to take my breath away. I spend a lot of time alone out here. Don't get me wrong, I see tourists all the time. It's talking with my fellow rangers that's scarce, but I don't mind. Solitude suits me, allowing me to immerse myself in the natural world around me. The whisper of wind through the pines, the distant call of an elk, the bubbling of hot springs. These are the sounds that fill my days. Sometimes, though, I wish I had company out in the thick of the trails. The vastness of Yellowstone can be overwhelming, and there are moments when the isolation weighs heavily on me. Little did I know that on that fateful day in July, I would come to cherish those moments of solitude. The day this all started, I set out early. The air was crisp with the lingering chill of the night, but I knew it would warm up quickly. There had been reports of downed trees blocking one of the more popular hiking trails, and it was my job to clear the way. It was routine work, the kind that fills most of my days. I grabbed my gear, axe, saw, water bottles, and a packed lunch, and headed into the woods. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds greeting the morning sun, and shafts of golden light pierced through the canopy, creating a dappled pattern on the forest floor. I found the first fallen tree a little past noon. A big old pine had come right down across the path, its massive trunk creating an impassable barrier for hikers. I set my pack down and got to work, the rhythmic sound of my saw cutting through the quiet of the forest. It was hot and sweaty work despite the shade, so I took frequent water breaks. The physical labor was demanding, but there was something satisfying about it. With each cut, I was helping to maintain the trails that allowed others to experience the beauty of Yellowstone. As I worked, I couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. The scent of fresh-cut pine filled the air, mingling with the earthy smell of the forest. A gentle breeze rustled through the leaves, providing momentary relief from the heat. I paused for a moment, wiping sweat from my brow, and took in the scenery around me. The towering trees, the patches of wildflowers, the distant call of a woodpecker. It was moments like these that reminded me why I love my job so much. Little did I know that this sense of peace was about to be shattered in the most horrific way imaginable. The scream cut through the air like a knife, instantly chilling my blood. It was a woman's voice, high-pitched and choked with terror. The sound seemed to come from deeper in the trees, not too far from where I was working. I dropped my saw, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. Adrenaline surged through my body, making my vision tunnel. "Hello," I yelled, my voice echoing through the trees. "Can you hear me?" There was no answer, just an eerie silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Then another scream pierced the air, louder this time and unmistakably closer. I took off running, pushing through the undergrowth, branches whipping at my face as I ran. "I'm coming," I shouted, hoping my voice would provide some comfort to whoever was in distress. "Hold on." I burst through a thick patch of bushes, and suddenly there she was. A young woman, probably in her mid-20s, with blonde hair matted with leaves and dirt. She was collapsed against a large boulder, her body shaking with sobs. As I approached, I saw that her hands were covered in blood. "Hey," I said, dropping to my knees beside her. "Are you all right? What happened?" She didn't speak, just pointed shakily further down the path. Her hands were trembling, covered in red, and I realized with a jolt that it wasn't her own blood. Following the direction of her frantic gestures, my stomach dropped. There, lying face down in the dirt about 20 feet away, was a body. "Stay here," I told the woman, my voice sounding surprisingly calm despite the panic rising in my chest. I approached the body cautiously, my eyes darting around the surrounding forest. Whatever had done this could still be nearby. The man, I could see now it was a man, was wearing a backpack with a bright green sleeping bag strapped to it. Probably a hiker, like so many others who came to explore Yellowstone's beauty. Now he lay motionless in the dirt, his body unnaturally still. "Sir?" I called out, clinging to a desperate hope. "Are you all right?" Silence was my only answer. I knelt beside him, my hand shaking as I reached out to check for a pulse. I gently rolled him over, and that's when I wished I hadn't. The man's chest was, there's no word for it. Torn open is the closest I can get. But it doesn't begin to describe the horror of what I saw. It was as if something huge had clawed at him, ripping out his insides with savage fury. There was blood everywhere, and bits of him I couldn't even identify. The forest floor was a canvas of gore, painted in shades of red I never knew existed. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A bear attack? There had been a few sightings recently, but even as the thought formed, I knew this was something different. Something worse. Rising to my feet, my brain worked at full speed. The woman was clearly in shock. I had to get her out of here, and I needed to call for help. But how? My radio was back with my gear near the felled trees. Do I leave the woman to get it? What if whatever did this comes back? I was frozen with indecision when I heard it. A crunching sound of twigs and leaves from the woods behind us. I whipped around, my heart in my throat, expecting to see a bear. But what I saw instead would haunt my nightmares for years to come. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I had ever seen before. The creature that emerged from the shadows of the forest was tall. Too tall to be human, and it moved all wrong. It stood on two legs, yes, but it was hunched over, its posture a mockery of human stance. Its arms were impossibly long, dragging on the ground like some primordial ape. But it wasn't an ape. It wasn't anything that belonged in this world. The thing was covered in what at first glance looked like dark fur, but as it moved closer, I realized with growing horror that it was matted hair, long, tangled, and matted with what looked horribly like dried blood. The creature tilted its head as if curious, and I found myself staring into its face. Its eyes were small and deep-set in a face that was both human and not. The jaw was too wide, stretching across its face in a grotesque parody of a smile, filled with long, yellowing teeth. It snarled silently, and that's when I saw the blood on its hands, not hands, claws. Long, curved, and wickedly sharp, still dripping with fresh blood. The woman behind me let out another scream, this one filled with pure, unadulterated terror. It broke the spell of horror that had frozen me in place. "Run," I yelled, my voice cracking with fear. "Run now!" The creature lunged forward with frightening speed, but I was already moving. I bolted back the way I came, crashing through the underbrush with reckless abandon. It was a desperate sprint, fueled by pure survival instinct. I could hear the woman's cries behind me, interspersed with those horrible snarls that seemed to grow closer with each passing second. My breath burned in my lungs and my legs threatened to give out, but I pushed on. Adrenaline gave me speed I didn't know I possessed. Branches whipped at my face, leaving stinging cuts, but I barely felt them. My entire world had narrowed down to this: run or die. I burst into the clearing where I had left my tools, and I saw them, my radio and my axe. In that split second, I had to make a choice. I snatched up the axe just as the creature burst from the tree line. For a wild moment, I considered facing it, protecting the woman I'd now dragged into this nightmare. But it was a ridiculous notion. This thing wasn't an animal. It was something twisted, something wrong, and I wasn't a hero. "Run towards the park entrance," I yelled at the woman, hoping she could hear me over the pounding of my own heart. Grabbing my radio, I followed my own advice and ran. My legs pumped furiously, my breaths coming in ragged, shallow gasps. I fumbled with the radio as I ran, calling desperately for backup. My voice was panicked, barely coherent as I gave the ranger station the bare essentials of our location. Then the voice of Janice, the dispatcher, came through, telling me help was on the way, to hang tight. But hanging tight was the one thing I couldn't do. I could hear the snarls behind me, closer with each passing second. Janice's voice crackled over the radio again, telling me helicopters and a team of rangers were inbound. They were minutes away, but minutes might as well have been years. The creature would be on me long before then. I pushed myself harder, my lungs threatening to burst, my limbs on fire. Then I heard it, the woman's scream behind me, piercing and desperate. Then it cut off abruptly. A terrible silence fell over the forest. Dread settled in the pit of my stomach. Tears of frustration stung my eyes as I ran faster, branches whipping my face. I had to make it. I couldn't let that thing catch me. The trees began to thin out ahead. I could see a break in the foliage, an opening, and that's when I spotted it. The old Firewatch Tower. The Firewatch Tower loomed ahead, a rusted relic from a bygone era. It wasn't much, but it was my only hope. I scrambled towards it, my legs burning with the effort. I reached the base of the tower and grabbed the rusted ladder, cursing my trembling hands as I began to climb. The metal rungs were slick with moisture, making each step a potential disaster. But fear gave me strength and I hauled myself up with desperate energy. The platform was only 20 feet up. Not much of a defense, but it was better than being on the ground. Gasping for air, I collapsed onto the wooden planks, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. After a moment, I risked a look back. The creature was there at the base of the tower, staring up at me with those terrible eyes. It snarled and pawed at the metal rungs, but it couldn't seem to figure out how to climb. The throbbing in my legs began to lessen. The pounding in my head started to subside. I clung to the railing for dear life, my knuckles white with the effort. That's when I heard it, the most glorious sound I've ever known. Helicopters. The sound of rotor blades filled the air, growing louder by the second. 3 helicopters appeared over the tree line, their powerful spotlights piercing the dimming forest. My adrenaline spiked again, not in fear this time, but in the hope of rescue. I waved my arms frantically, trying to catch their attention. One of the helicopters descended, stirring up leaves and dust with its powerful blades. Below, I saw rangers spill out of the chopper. Men and women I knew, some of them trained with firearms. They moved in a tactical formation, rifles raised, shouting for me to stay put. But my eyes were drawn to the trees. The creature had vanished back into the shadows as if it had never been there. It felt like a lifetime before they managed to get me down from the tower. They lowered a harness and I fumbled with the straps, my hands still shaking from the ordeal. When my feet finally touched solid ground, my legs turned to jelly and I nearly collapsed. 2 rangers flanked me, their guns pointed outwards as we made our way back into the woods. We found the man's body first, the gruesome scene just as I had left it. Then we found the woman, or what was left of her. The aftermath was horrific, far worse than the initial sight of the man's corpse. I can't put the details into words. The rangers were hard men, weathered by the things they'd seen out here, but they blanched at the sight. One of them turned aside to vomit. There was no sign of the creature. It had vanished like a ghost, though the evidence of its inhuman brutality was sickeningly real. The rangers collected what was left of the woman's body, solemnly bagging the pieces. The man, at least, was easier to recover. I was spared none of this, the ordeal not ending even with my rescue. That night I found myself back at the ranger station giving my statement. It was a blur of well-meaning faces, offers of coffee and blankets, concerned questions. I answered mechanically, still trapped inside my own head, replaying the day's events, the screams, the chase, and the sight of those things the monster had left behind. Janice, the dispatcher whose voice had been a lifeline during my escape, pulled me aside. Her face was etched with concern, her eyes searching mine as if looking for something she hoped not to find. "I know you're in shock, Harold," she said gently, "but we need to talk about what you saw back there. That thing." The word hung in the air, heavy and ugly. I described it as best I could. The hunched posture, the matted hair, the too wide jaw, and those damn eyes, deep set and gleaming in the dark like an animal, yet with a chilling intelligence behind them. Janice listened, her face growing paler with each detail. They searched the woods the next day and the day after that. No sign of the creature, not a footprint, not a strand of hair. The park was shut down, tourists turned away. A whole section of Yellowstone was cordoned off. They even brought in search dogs, but the creature was gone, swallowed up by the wilderness as if it had never been there. The aftermath, well, let's just say it's been hell. Reporters swarmed like vultures, local ones at first, then national as the story made headlines. Beast of Yellowstone, they called it, stirring up a frenzy. Conspiracy theorists popped up, raving about aliens or government experiments gone wrong. Some even accused me, saying I'd made it all up, or worse, that I was the monster. I was put on leave, of course. Mandatory counseling sessions, psych evaluations, the whole 9 yards. They asked the same questions over and over. Could it have been a bear? Did I see it clearly? Was it possible I'd imagined the whole thing? Maybe it was the shock, the trauma playing tricks on my mind. They kept searching the woods, finding nothing, and I could see the doubt lingering in their eyes. The worst part was, I began to doubt myself too. There were no witnesses, no evidence of the thing except for what it did to those poor people. The nights became a waking nightmare. I'd see the creature's face every time I closed my eyes. Those gleaming eyes and yellow teeth, the blood on its claws. I'd see the woman, what was left of her, and hear her screams echoing in my head. Months passed, and the furor died down a little. There were no new attacks, no sightings of the creature. Life in the little tourist town near the park started to return to normal, but it wasn't normal for me. I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched, that the thing was still out there, waiting. I started checking over my shoulder every 2 minutes, jumping at any odd sound. The trees that once felt like home now seemed menacing, every shadow a potential hiding place for the monster. My fellow rangers tried to be supportive, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They'd smile and nod when I talked about the creature, but their expressions were those of people humoring someone they thought might be losing their grip on reality. It was isolating, to say the least. A year after the incident, I quit the Park Service. I couldn't bear the sight of the forest anymore. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig sent my heart racing. The wilderness I once loved had become a source of constant terror. I moved away, trying to rebuild a life somewhere the woods weren't looming over me. I found a small apartment in a bustling city, surrounded by concrete and steel instead of trees and mountains. Some days, I almost succeeded in convincing myself that what happened in Yellowstone was just a terrible nightmare. I told myself it was a rogue bear attack, a freak accident amplified by trauma and fear. I forced myself to forget the creature's too human face, the calculating malevolence in its eyes. But then there were the reports. It started with whispers, rumors on the internet that I tried my best to ignore. But soon the stories were impossible to overlook. Not in Yellowstone, no. The attacks were happening hundreds of miles away, deep in other national forests, missing hikers, bodies torn apart, all bearing the same gruesome signature I had witnessed that day in Yellowstone. People whispered the same name, the Beast. They didn't know the details. How could they? But I knew. It was out there still hunting. The news stories fueled my nightmares. I started carrying a gun, learned how to use it properly. Some nights I'd leave my blinds open, watching the shadows shift in the streetlights below just in case. The city that had once felt like a safe haven now seemed like a fragile illusion of security. I tried reaching out to my old colleagues at Yellowstone, but the response was always the same. Polite dismissals, gentle suggestions that maybe I should talk to someone about what I'd been through. They didn't want to hear about the new attacks, didn't want to consider that what had happened that day might be part of something larger and more terrifying. The other rangers, well, we didn't talk about it, not directly, but sometimes at reunions I'd catch them watching me, their eyes filled with pity or something worse, like they thought I'd broken, that I was one step away from snapping, hunting a monster that may only exist inside my head. And maybe they were right. Maybe the trauma had warped my mind, made me see connections where there were none. But deep down I knew the truth. The beast was real and it was still out there. It's been nearly 3 decades since that day in Yellowstone, and I'm an old man now. The world has moved on, forgotten about the Beast of Yellowstone incident. It's become nothing more than a local legend, a story to scare tourists around campfires. But I haven't forgotten. I can't forget. I've spent years researching, gathering every scrap of information I could find about similar attacks. I've plotted them on maps looking for patterns, trying to understand the creature's movements. And slowly a picture has emerged. It's not just one beast. There are more of them out there, hidden in the wild places of the world. They're smart, they're careful, and they're patient. They strike rarely, but when they do, it's with terrifying brutality. I've tried to warn people to get the authorities to take it seriously. But who's going to listen to an old man rambling about monsters in the woods? I'm just another crackpot, another conspiracy theorist to be ignored or pitied. But I know the truth. And that's why I'm writing this now, putting my story down in the hope that someday someone will believe, someone will understand the danger that's out there, lurking in the shadows of our wilderness. To whoever reads this, be careful out there. The woods are beautiful, but they hide secrets, dark, terrible secrets. And sometimes those secrets have teeth and claws. My name is Harold Carter. I'm 74 years old. And this is my warning to the world. My name is Richard Lewis, and I am 65 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened to me in September of 2010, but the memory of it is as fresh as if it were yesterday. I've been a park ranger in Yellowstone National Park for 15 years now. Married with 2 kids, a dog, the whole suburban bliss situation tucked into a corner of this wild place. You'd think I got used to it, to the scale of the wilderness and the secrets it holds, but the truth is you never quite do. That particular day started like most others. I woke up at dawn, kissed my wife Sarah goodbye, and headed out for my routine patrols through my assigned section of the park. The air was crisp with the first hints of autumn, and the early morning mist was just starting to lift from the valleys. My job was to check for illegal campers, make sure those trail permits were in order, and generally keep an eye on things. Yellowstone's a tourist magnet, but we try to keep things as controlled as possible. I was nearing one of the more remote offshoots of the Pelican Valley when I spotted it. A carcass, a good few hundred feet off the trail, half obscured by bushes. From the size, I guessed it was an elk. I frowned in annoyance, thinking of the paperwork if it turned out to be a poaching case. With a sigh, I radioed in my location and made my way towards it. Wolves were a possibility too, of course. It'd be good to know which for the sake of the visitors. But as I got closer, I saw the first sign that something was very, very wrong. There was no blood around the carcass, not a drop. I stopped in my tracks, a chill creeping up my spine. I'm no greenhorn. I've seen my share of predator kills, and this made no sense. The closer I got, the worse it became. The elk's bones were picked absolutely clean. No trace of meat nor any sign of gnawing. It looked surgical somehow. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. And then I caught a whiff of the rotten stench clinging to the remains. I gagged, my stomach churning. It wasn't the natural decay of carrion. It had a sickening sweetness to it, mixed with something metallic. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, to get as far away from this place as possible. I turned to go when something massive exploded from the bushes behind me. I staggered from the impact, barely managing to avoid its lunge. I whipped around, my gun already in my hand, to see the thing. It was like nothing I'd ever encountered before. It stood on 2 legs, easily twice my height, its body lean and muscled in a way that was wrong. Skin stretched tight over bulging sinew, a sickly gray color. The head, Disproportionately small atop its broad shoulders, had a skull-like appearance and jaws that dripped with drool. Its eyes were milky white, no pupils, just empty orbs that seemed to stare right through me. Panic shot through me, hot and blinding. I fired off a shot more out of instinct than anything else. The creature flinched back, making a hissing sound that made my teeth rattle. The second shot went wild, and then I was running. Running like my life depended on it, because it did. I heard it pounding after me, the trees whipping by in a blur. At one point, its claws tore through my jacket, leaving burning gashes on my back. I stumbled, and the world tilted crazily, but I managed to keep myself upright. I finally burst through the tree line and onto the trail. A family out on a hike watched open-mouthed as I sprinted by, the creature hot on my heels. I screamed at them to run. They reacted a moment too late. The dad tried to put himself between his family and the thing, but it swiped him aside with ridiculous ease. His body crashed into a tree. I heard his wife scream. I kept running. Shots cracked behind me. The creature roared and abruptly changed course. I looked back just in time to see it lunge for one of the park cops, the ones frantically responding to my mayday call. They barely had time to register what was happening before the creature was on them. And then it was a maelstrom of blood and screams and gunfire. I ran until my lungs threatened to burst. I ran until the sounds of carnage behind me faded, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. Eventually, I found a fallen log, half hidden by ferns, and crouched there, gasping for breath. The trembling wouldn't stop. For a long time, all I could do was try not to throw up and wait for rescue. I don't remember much of the next few hours. There was a helicopter, a field medic, and a whole lot of confused questions. I was in shock. The thing I saw, it shouldn't have been possible. Nobody believed my description, of course. Predator attack, they kept saying. Maybe even a rogue grizzly. The incident made national news. 4 dead? A horrifying creature sighted by a hysterical ranger. In the end, it was dismissed as post-traumatic hallucinations. I was forced to undergo psych evaluations, put on temporary leave, all the while having nightmares about those empty eyes and razor-sharp claws. My family bore the brunt of it. The whispers when we went to the supermarket. The flinches whenever my kids made too much noise. My wife Sarah stood by me, fierce as a mama bear protecting her cubs. But I could see the stress in her eyes, the strain on our marriage. One night I woke up screaming, my heart pounding, a frantic tattoo against my ribs. Sarah was by my side in an instant, soothing words spilling from her mouth even as she switched on the bedside lamp. And in the soft light I noticed it. A thin, glistening trail of mucus on the pillow and a strange, acrid smell clinging to my skin. I spent the rest of that night in the shower scrubbing myself raw, trying to wash away the feeling of wrongness. In the morning, pretending to be fine, pretending not to notice Sarah's worried glances, I dug through my gear, found my old hunting rifle, the one Grandpa taught me to shoot with back when I was just a kid. It felt heavy in my trembling hands. No way I was letting it come for my family, too. My resignation letter was the most difficult thing I ever wrote. Sarah didn't try to stop me, just held me tight and whispered, "Be careful." Then, with a last kiss for her and the kids, I got in my truck and drove back to Yellowstone. I found my way to that clearing near Pelican Valley, the place where it all began. The stench nearly made me lose my breakfast all over again. I steeled myself, the rifle held steady, and followed the putrid trail deeper into the woods. For a long time it was like chasing shadows, half-heard noises, glimpses of mottled gray disappearing behind the trees. Then I found another carcass, this one a deer, picked clean the same way as the elk. My rage exploded, grief fueling its fire. They should have believed me, they should have done something. I pushed forward, my movements growing less measured. The forest seemed to watch with an ancient sort of malice. The air charged with a crackling intensity that set my teeth on edge. I had no doubt I was the one being hunted now. And then there it was, lounging in a clearing, the light filtering through the leaves, casting strange patterns on its grotesque hide. The rage bubbled over. The thing lifted its skull-like head, its nostrils quivering. Before it could react, I aimed and fired. The roar of the rifle echoed, followed by a shriek of pain. The creature staggered, blood spraying the grass. It looked at me, those horrible eyes wide. Surprise flickered across them, maybe even fear. For a moment, the impossible dared to feel possible, and then it charged. My second shot missed. My third lodged itself in its shoulder, slowing it just enough. I flung the rifle away and sprinted back towards the trees. the creature's enraged bellows filling the air behind me. I scrambled up a gnarled old tree. I was high enough to see over the undergrowth when the creature finally came crashing into the clearing. It circled the base of the trunk, frustrated growls rumbling from its depths. My heart pounded so hard I was sure it would burst from my chest. We stayed like that for what felt like forever. Me perched precariously in a tree, the monster below, neither of us willing to give an inch. As the light began to fade, the creature turned its empty eyes up towards me, and I felt the first trickle of despair. It wasn't going to leave. I was going to die up here, alone and forgotten. But then a glimmer of movement in the distance caught my eye. A pack of wolves, at least 6 strong, slinking silently through the underbrush. They zeroed in on the creature. Something ancient flared in its expression then, a primal understanding passing between them. It turned, and with a last look in my direction, loped off into the gathering darkness. The wolves watched it go, and then without a backward glance, disappeared back into the twilight. I didn't move for a long time, every muscle screaming in protest. Finally, with shaking legs, I climbed down. My journey back to my truck was a blur. Every rustle of leaves had me flinching, my hands slick with cold sweat. When I finally got home, Sarah just held me. No questions, just understanding and the scent of her familiar perfume washing over me. The nightmares lessened after that, fading into a dull, constant dread that was almost manageable. The resignation and relief warred within me. Park rangers are called to protect, but on some days that means protecting the public from monsters that aren't supposed to exist, and sometimes it means protecting the monsters from us. I never went back to my section of the park. Something safer, something that didn't leave me haunted by empty white eyes and the sweet metallic stench of death. Not many can understand the aftermath. My scars run deep, seen clearly only by my wife and those who share a bond forged in the heart of Yellowstone's secrets. They say time heals all wounds. They're wrong. Some wounds mark you for life. Reminders that the world is wilder and far more terrible than we dare imagine. As I sit here years later, I can't help but wonder, is it still out there, that unnatural predator? And if it is, who will be the next to stumble upon its hunting grounds? All I know is that the wilderness holds secrets, and some of them have teeth. My name is James Walker. This is a true story of events that happened to me in September of 2012, when I was a ranger in Olympic National Park. I've been hesitant to share this account for years, but now, as I approach the twilight of my life, I feel compelled to put these experiences to paper. Perhaps it will serve as a warning, or maybe just a reminder that there are things in this world beyond our understanding. I had been a ranger in Olympic National Park for a little over 5 years when it happened. The job was a perfect fit for me. I loved the rainforests, the remoteness, the feeling that I'd stepped into another world entirely. But there's remote, and then there's the Deep Hoh rainforest. Miles of old-growth trees dripping with moss, thick underbrush that seems to swallow sound itself. The kind of place where sunlight barely filters through and getting lost is terrifyingly easy. In early September of 2012, I was assigned to trail maintenance in one of the most secluded areas of the park. It was a routine 2-day job meant to be tackled alone. Routine, at least by ranger standards. My first day on the job went about as smoothly as cutting back vines and overgrowth can get. By evening, I'd set up camp in a small clearing near the river, cooked myself a freeze-dried dinner, and settled down with my headlamp and a paperback to unwind before bed. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a bear, not a cougar, not the usual symphony of forest critters settling in for the night. It was something like a sob, choked and desperate, followed by a scuffling sound in the undergrowth. Now, protocol is clear when it comes to civilians in trouble. That's when you intervene. But rangers out in the backcountry? You tread lightly, respect the wilderness for what it is. Still, there was something about that sound that set my teeth on edge. I grabbed my rifle, clicked off the safety, and headed in the direction of the noise. The ferns and fallen leaves muffled my footsteps, making the forest seem even quieter after the strange cry. Every creaking branch had me on edge. Up ahead, something thrashed in a thicket of thorny vines. "Hello? Anyone there?" I called out, my voice hoarse in the quiet. No answer came, just an odd rustling sound followed by a flash of movement deeper in the darkness. I took a cautious step forward, my finger resting lightly on the trigger of my rifle. And that's when the thing pounced. It knocked me clean off my feet, a blur of sinewy limbs and foul-smelling fur. I hit the wet ground with a grunt, my rifle skidding away into the underbrush. I got a glimpse of clawed hands too long for a bear and rows of teeth pointed in yellow. But all I really remember are the eyes, big, amber, and burning with a hate that felt, well, not just animal. It let out a blood-curdling screech and lunged for my throat. I rolled away, fumbling desperately in the damp leaves for my rifle. I found it, twisted as much as I dared with the thing so close, and took a shot. More out of instinct than anything else. The thing recoiled with a howl, a spray of blood marking the tree behind it, but it wasn't down. It circled me, panting heavily, its eyes locked on me like prey. That's when I saw it clearly. Too skinny to be a bear, yet strong enough to have taken a grown man down. Skin stretched over prominent ribs, patchy in places, and mottled a sickly brown. The head was almost dog-like, but elongated and filled with far too many teeth. It stalked me like a predator, but there was more there. An intelligence that set my teeth on edge. I fired again. It flinched, then scrambled further into the undergrowth, vanishing in seconds amidst the shadows of the trees. Shaking, I got to my feet, my heart pounding like a war drum. I had to get out of there. Radioing in to report the incident was met with predictable skepticism. It took 3 days. A team of rangers armed to the teeth and an awful lot of blood splatter on the forest floor before they believed what I saw out there. They never found the creature. Said it must have been a sick bear or maybe a coyote with mange playing mind games with me. I transferred shortly after that. Took a desk job up in Seattle. I haven't even liked going on hikes lately. The trees closing in too tight. But every now and then at night, when the city noise subsides, I swear I hear that screech again. And then I see those eyes, glowing in the darkness just beyond my window. It's been over a decade since that night in Olympic National Park, but the memory hasn't faded. If anything, it's grown sharper, more insistent. I've tried to rationalize it, to explain it away as the product of fear and isolation. But deep down, I know what I saw was real. I'm not the only one with a story like this. Over the years, I've heard whispers, fragments of similar encounters from other rangers, hikers, and backwoods folk. They don't talk about it openly. Who would believe them? But in quiet corners of bars, around dying campfires, the stories come out. There was Elias Harper, a ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains. His story reached me through the grapevine, passed along by a mutual friend who knew we'd both seen something. Elias's encounter happened in October of 2016, 4 years after mine. The details were different, but the core of it, the otherworldly menace, the primal fear, that was the same. Elias told it like this. I'm a national park ranger working in the Great Smoky Mountains. Love the views up here, but man, these woods go on forever, and half the time you can't see 10 feet through the fog. Perfect recipe for folks getting themselves lost. Got the call about a missing hiker around dusk. Young guy, early 20s, on a solo trip. Last checked in at a ranger station further into the backcountry, and never made it to his planned campsite. Cell service out here is spotty at best, so it wasn't uncommon for people to go off-grid for stretches. But a storm was brewing, and rangers don't take chances. I suited up, headed out. The trail wound through thick forest, dripping with mist and shadowed by ancient trees. Rain began to fall, a cold, insistent drizzle. Found his discarded pack a few miles in. It was torn open, gear scattered like he dumped it in a panic. I knelt by a shredded energy bar wrapper, frown deepening. Didn't look like a bear attack. Bear scat's easy to spot, and they usually leave most of the inedible stuff undisturbed. What I did find were tracks, big ones. Too wide for a human, and the toes were splayed out strangely. A chill unrelated to the rain snaked down my spine. We get mountain lions up here, but something about the size and shape of these prints felt wrong. Followed those tracks deeper into the woods. The rain picked up, washing away any clearer trace. But I knew I was on the right path. Panic gnawed at my gut. If it was a big cat, the weather would flush it out into the open, same as the hiker. We were both in danger, only I had a radio and a rifle. The forest floor sloped downwards, leading towards a shadowy ravine. As I got closer, the smell hit me. Blood and wet fur mixing with that same rotten chemical stink that had been haunting my nightmares ever since. Well, that's a whole other mess. But trust me, once you smell that, you don't ever forget it. The ravine snaked through the trees, and I moved silently along the high ground, tracking whatever had made those prints. Then ahead of me, movement. A flicker of something pale and unnaturally large hunkering beneath a jutting rock. I crouched lower, heart pounding against my ribs. That's when I saw it. Truly saw it. Not a mountain lion. This thing, it was humanoid but only vaguely. Too tall, too lean, its skin hanging loose on a knobby frame. Its head was like a misshapen skull with yellow eyes that burned like embers in the gathering gloom. Claws, long as a man's fingers, dug into the carcass of what used to be the missing hiker. I fought back bile, raised my rifle with trembling hands. I was a decent shot, but this was beyond any training they give you at the academy. Had to make this first one count. Lined up the sights, took a deep, steadying breath. Then the damn flashlight flickered. Must have gotten knocked loose when I dropped my pack back at the campsite. The beam of light swung wildly, illuminating the creature for a horrifying second. It shrieked, a sound like metal scraping against stone, and reared back, shielding its eyes. It dropped the remains of the hiker and lunged toward me, moving with a speed that defied its skeletal frame. I fired once, twice, the rifle bucking hard against my shoulder. It flinched, roared, but it kept coming. I only had time to scramble back a few steps before it was on me. A force like a runaway truck slammed into my chest, sending me sprawling backward. I hit the earth hard, rifle flying from my grasp. The creature loomed above me, its fetid breath washing over my face. I fumbled for my backup pistol, fingers clumsy with fear and cold. It raised a clawed hand to strike. Somehow I managed to roll, the blow narrowly missing my skull but tearing open my shoulder. I scrambled back, scrabbling desperately for a weapon, anything. The creature snarled, stalking forward. Pain seared through me and my vision blurred around the edges. This was it. This was how it ended. A sudden beam of intense light cut through the forest gloom, so bright it made me flinch. The creature jerked back, hissing, the light stinging its eyes. Confused but desperate, I swung my own flashlight around. Another beam joined mine from further down the slope, accompanied by a familiar voice yelling my name. Reinforcements, finally. The creature, caught between our flashlights, whirled in a frenzy of snapping claws and gnashing teeth. Its skin began to smoke where the light touched it, a sickening smell filling the air. And then, with a final howl of rage, it turned and vanished into the undergrowth, the sounds of its retreat muffled by the pounding rain and the roaring pulse in my ears. My fellow rangers, Edie and Walker, found me slumped against a tree, bleeding and gasping for breath. Their faces were a mix of relief and horror when they saw the claw marks raking my shoulder. Edie patched me up as best she could while Walker swept the area. Found my rifle further down the ravine, but no sign of the creature. It took two of them to haul me back down the trail to the main road. They kept throwing nervous glances over their shoulders, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Every rustle of branches, every echoing hoot of an owl made us jumpy. It wasn't until the flashing lights of the ambulance came into view that I began to relax the death grip I had on my pistol. At the hospital, they stitched me up, ran every test imaginable, and then came the questions. Park service? Local cops? They all wanted details. I stumbled through a description of the creature, doing my best to stick to the facts, avoid sounding like a lunatic seeing monsters. They exchanged uneasy looks. I could read it in their eyes. They didn't fully believe me. Word must have leaked because soon enough the reporters descended. Questions about the missing hiker, the animal attack. I stuck to my line. Injuries attributed to falling during the rescue mission. Can't have the whole world thinking there's some unholy beast roaming our national parks. They bought the story, at least officially. The aftermath was a blur. Weeks of physical therapy for my torn-up shoulder, nightmares that jolted me awake, sweating and gasping. I went back to work eventually, but everything had changed. Every hike, every patrol, I scanned the trees, not for lost hikers, but for those glowing yellow eyes and the stench of decay. And there were rumors, whispers among the other rangers. A sighting of a strange, emaciated figure near a campsite. A string of shredded tents blamed on wild animal activity. Or that whisper about the lone hiker who went missing deep in the backcountry, leaving behind only a single monstrous footprint in the mud. Nobody ever connected the dots officially, of course. One night I was on a late patrol when I encountered Edie at a crossroads deep in the park. She didn't say a word, just passed me a thermos of strong coffee and a sealed envelope. Didn't need to ask what was inside. Silver bullets, hand-loaded. Not standard issue for park rangers, that's for sure. She met my gaze, the unspoken understanding clear in her eyes. After what you saw, she said, her voice low. Figured you could use these. Be careful out here, Elias. The knowledge that I wasn't alone in this, that helped. Some nights at least. But there was also a growing certainty. This wasn't over. That creature was still out there. Call it a Wendigo, a demon, whatever those old stories named it. The fact remains, there's something preying on the lost and alone in these mountains. One day maybe I'd track it down, put an end to its reign of terror, but that felt like a fool's hope. See, the thing about fighting monsters is they fight back. And sometimes they win. One foggy morning, a shredded backpack turns up or a hiker vanishes on a familiar trail, and I'm left wondering if it got another one. Meanwhile, my own life's on hold. Got a half-healed scar, a beat-up old truck, and a growing collection of high-powered flashlights. No wife, no kids, can't drag anyone into this mess. Sometimes I think about leaving the mountains. Try getting lost in a big city crowd for a while. See if I could just disappear. But then I remember the faces of the missing. The way that young hiker's torn-up gear was strewn across the trail. The look in Edie's eyes when she handed me those bullets. And something stubborn and stupid inside me digs in. So I stay, keep my gear ready, rifle cleaned, and an extra flashlight within reach at all times. Every time I drive along the park roads, every time I head into the woods, the weight of responsibility settles heavy on my shoulders. Feels less like a job now and more like a war most folks don't even know is happening. And out there, under the old trees and shrouded in the mountain fog, it waits. The creature with the glowing eyes and the unending hunger waits for the next lost hiker, the next overconfident camper, the next ranger who stumbles upon its shadowed domain. Some nights, lying awake in my cabin with the rain rattling the roof and the wind sounding like a mournful howl, I wonder who it will be waiting for when I inevitably fail, when my flashlight flickers or my aim misjudges, or it finally catches me unaware. And who, if anyone, will take up the fight when I'm gone. Maybe someday this story will get told after it's too late for me. Maybe some younger ranger, green and brave and foolish like I used to be, will find this account. If that's you, whoever you are, well, good luck, kid. You'll need it. Because trust me, the monsters are real. The battle will never end. And if the shadows in the woods seem a little deeper, those glowing eyes in the distance a little brighter, the rustle of leaves a little closer, well, best keep your wits sharp and your flashlight ready. You might just be the next line of defense against the things unseen. As I, James Walker, sit here in my Seattle apartment, looking out at the city lights that never quite banish the darkness, I can't help but feel a connection to Elias and all the others who faced the unknown in the wilderness. Our stories may differ in the details, but the core truth remains the same. There are things out there, things beyond our understanding, and they're hungry. I've often wondered if I should have stayed, should have fought like Elias did, but fear got the better of me. I ran from the forests, from the responsibility. Yet even here, surrounded by concrete and steel, I can't escape the memory of those eyes. That unholy screw. I've often wondered if I should have stayed, should have fought like Elias did, but fear got the better of me. I ran from the forests, from the responsibility. Yet even here, surrounded by concrete and steel, I can't escape the memory of those eyes, that unholy screech. Sometimes, on particularly dark nights, I find myself reaching for a flashlight, peering out into the city shadows. Because deep down, I know the truth that Elias and others like him face every day. The monsters are real, and they're not confined to the wilderness. They're out there, waiting, watching, and whether we choose to face them or not, their hunger never ceases. So to anyone who reads this, remember, stay vigilant, trust your instincts, and always keep a light nearby. The battle against the unseen may never end, but as long as there are those willing to stand against the darkness, there's hope. My name is Ronald Hall. I've been a ranger with the National Park Service for almost 15 years now. But my story, and my love affair with Yellowstone, started long before I put on the uniform. I grew up in a small town in Montana, just north of Yellowstone. As a kid, the park was my playground, my classroom, and my first love. I can still remember the first time my dad took me to see Old Faithful. I was maybe 7 or 8, all gangly limbs and wide-eyed wonder. We stood there in the crowd, waiting, and I remember thinking it was all a big joke. How could water just shoot out of the ground like that? And then it happened. The geyser erupted, a towering column of steam and water that seemed to touch the sky. I was awestruck. In that moment, I knew that Yellowstone was something special, something magical. As I grew older, my fascination with the park only deepened. Every chance I got, I was there, hiking the trails, watching the wildlife, learning the rhythms of the land. By the time I was in high school, I knew every inch of the park that was open to the public, and quite a few that weren't. I went away to college, studied environmental science, always with the goal of coming back to Yellowstone. But life has a way of taking unexpected turns. I ended up in the corporate world working for a big energy company. Good money, but it never sat right with me. Every time I had to write a report justifying some new drilling project, I felt like I was betraying that wide-eyed kid who'd fallen in love with Old Faithful. It took me 30 years to find my way back. 30 years of boardrooms and balance, sheets of feeling more and more disconnected from the natural world I loved. When I finally quit, my wife thought I was having a midlife crisis. Maybe I was. All I knew was that I needed to get back to Yellowstone. I applied to the National Park Service the day after I quit my job. I was 57 years old, competing against kids fresh out of college, but I had something they didn't, a lifetime of love for the park and a determination to protect it. To my surprise, they hired me. I like to think it was my qualifications, but sometimes I wonder if they just needed someone who could afford to work for government wages. Those first few years as a ranger were like coming home. Every day I'd put on that uniform, pin on that badge, and feel a sense of pride I'd never known in all my years in the corporate world. I was where I belonged, doing what I was meant to do. But Yellowstone, for all its beauty, isn't always a gentle place. It's a land of extremes, boiling hot springs and freezing winters, peaceful meadows and violent volcanic activity. And as I was about to learn, it held secrets far darker and more terrifying than I could have imagined. It was the fall of 2016 when things started to change. I'd been a ranger for about 12 years by then, mostly doing backcountry work, trail maintenance, wildlife surveys, the occasional search and rescue when some unprepared tourist decided to go off trail and got themselves lost. October in Yellowstone is a special time. The summer crowds have gone, leaving the park to those of us who call it home year-round. The air gets crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. The aspens turn a brilliant gold, standing out against the deep green of the pines like nature's own work of art. I was out on the Pelican Valley Trail doing some routine maintenance. It had been a busy summer and the trail was showing the wear and tear of thousands of boots. I was hauling fallen timber, clearing the path, enjoying the quiet. That's one of the things I love most about the backcountry, the silence. Not complete silence, mind you. There's always something if you listen close enough. The whisper of wind through the trees, the distant call of an elk, the scurrying of small creatures in the underbrush. But it's a different kind of quiet than you get in the city. It's a living quiet, if that makes any sense. I had been working for a few hours when I smelled it. At first I thought it was just the usual forest smell, decaying leaves, damp earth. But there was something else underneath. Something wrong. It was a sickly sweet smell like meat left out in the sun too long. I followed the smell, my heart starting to race. In the back of my mind I was thinking it was probably just a dead animal. Maybe a deer or an elk that had been taken down by a predator. But as I got closer, that rational part of my brain started to quiet down, replaced by a growing sense of dread. I found him in a small clearing, near a stand of aspens. What was left of him anyway. The body was, well, it's hard to describe without turning your stomach. The clothes were in shreds, barely recognizable as clothing at all. What the scavengers hadn't gotten to was twisted and mangled in a way that made my blood run cold. Now, I've seen my share of animal attacks over the years. Bears, mountain lions, even the occasional wolf. This wasn't like any of those. The bones were gnawed on, sure, but the marks were all wrong. Too precise in some places, too savage in others, and the way the body was positioned. It was like whatever had done this had been playing with its food. I radioed it in, trying to keep my voice steady. I expected they'd send out a wildlife biologist, maybe one of the bear management team. What I didn't expect was the response I got. Ranger Hall, secure the area. Do not approach the remains. Wait for the response team. Over. The voice on the other end was tense, clipped, not the usual easygoing tone of our dispatch. I tried to get more information, but all I got was a repeated order to stay put and wait for the team. They arrived about an hour later. 3 men in unmarked black SUVs. They weren't Park Service, that much was clear. They moved with a kind of practiced efficiency that spoke of military or law enforcement background. One of them, a tall, lean man with close-cropped gray hair, approached me while the others secured the scene. "Ranger Hall?" he asked, his voice gruff. I nodded. "I'm Agent Hawkins. We'll take it from here. I need you to forget what you saw here today. Understood?" I started to protest. This was my park after all. I had a right to know what was going on. But something in Hawkins's eyes stopped me. There was a hardness there, yes, but also something else. Fear? Surely not. What could make a man like that afraid? "Understood," I said, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. As I turned to leave, Hawkins called out to me, "Ranger Hall? Keep your eyes open out there, and if you see anything unusual, you call it in immediately. Do not engage. Do you understand?" I nodded again, a chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn air. As I made my way back to my patrol vehicle, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The forest, which had always been a place of wonder and beauty to me, suddenly felt oppressive, threatening. Every shadow seemed to hide some nameless threat, every rustle in the undergrowth a potential danger. I didn't sleep well that night, or for many nights after. In my dreams I saw those mangled remains, heard the crunch of bones, smelled that sickly sweet odor. And always, there was a presence in the darkness, watching, waiting. Little did I know this was just the beginning. The true horrors that Yellowstone held were yet to reveal themselves. In the days following the discovery, an uneasy quiet settled over the ranger station. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The official story was that the body I'd found was the result of a bear attack. But none of us who worked the backcountry were buying it. Jenna, my usual patrol partner, cornered me in the break room about a week after the incident. She was a tough cookie, Jenna. Ex-military, been with the Park Service for over a decade. Not the type to scare easy, Ron, she said, her voice low. "What really happened out there?" I glanced around, making sure we were alone. "I told you, Jen, bear attack." She snorted, clearly not buying it. "Cut the crap, Ron, I've seen bear attacks." "That report you filed? That wasn't no bear." I sighed, feeling the weight of the secret pressing down on me. "I don't know what it was, Jen, but you're right. It wasn't a bear." I told her everything. The strange marks on the bones, the way the body had been arranged, the men in black SUVs. As I spoke, I watched the color drain from her face. "Jesus, Ron," she whispered when I'd finished. "What the hell is going on in this park?" I shook my head. "I don't know, but I've got a feeling we're going to find out, whether we want to or not." Over the next few weeks, the whispers grew. Other rangers reported strange sightings, unusual tracks that didn't match any known animal, eerie howls in the night that sent chills down the spines of even the most experienced backcountry guides. And always that lingering sense of being watched. The tourists, of course, noticed nothing. They continued to flood into the park, oohing and eyeing over Old Faithful, snapping pictures of bison and elk, blissfully unaware of the darkness that seemed to be gathering at the edges of their vision. But we knew. We rangers, we could feel it. Something had changed in Yellowstone. The land itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. It was about 3 weeks after I'd found the body that I had my first real encounter with. Whatever it was that was stalking our park, I was out on a routine patrol, checking some of the more remote campsites. It was late afternoon, that golden hour when the sun hangs low in the sky, painting everything in warm, rich colors. I'd just finished inspecting a campsite and was heading back to my vehicle when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind. A low moaning sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. But as I listened, it changed, became more focused, more intentional. It was coming from a thick stand of pines off to my left. I stood there frozen, my hand on my sidearm. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to get the hell out of there. But I was a ranger. This was my park, my responsibility. Slowly, carefully, I moved towards the sound. The moaning had stopped, replaced by a heavy, wet breathing. As I got closer, I caught a whiff of that same sickly sweet smell I'd encountered at the scene of the body. I was about 10 feet from the tree line when I saw it. Just for a second, a fleeting glimpse through the branches. A shape massive and dark, moving with a fluidity that seemed impossible for its size. And eyes, God, those eyes. Yellow and glowing, filled with an intelligence that was anything but animal. For a moment, those eyes locked with mine, and I felt a terror so profound it rooted me to the spot. This wasn't just an animal. This was something else. Something that didn't belong in this world, and then it was gone. The shape melted back into the shadows, leaving nothing but the rustling of branches and that lingering awful smell. I don't remember much about the trip back to my vehicle. I drove back to the ranger station in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I got there, I sat in the parking lot for a long time, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Part of me wanted to report it, to tell someone, anyone, about what was out there in our woods. But another part, a part that was growing stronger by the day, knew that doing so would be useless. Whatever this thing was, it was beyond our usual protocols, beyond our understanding. As I finally got out of my vehicle and headed into the station, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. I looked older somehow, worn, and in my eyes I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The true test of our courage, and of the very fabric of reality as we knew it, was yet to come. As autumn deepened into winter, the atmosphere in Yellowstone grew increasingly tense. The tourist season was winding down, leaving the park to those of us who called it home year-round. But unlike previous years, when the quiet months were a welcome respite, this winter brought with it a sense of foreboding. More sightings were reported. Strange tracks in the snow that didn't match any known animal, eerie howls that echoed through the valleys, setting the wolves to answering with their own mournful cries. And always that sense of being watched. The higher-ups tried to keep a lid on things. Official reports spoke of unusually active wildlife, of natural phenomena that were under investigation. But those of us on the ground knew better. We'd seen too much, heard too much to buy the official line. Jenna and I were paired up more often than not these days. There was an unspoken agreement among the rangers. Nobody went into the backcountry alone anymore. Safety in numbers, though deep down, I think we all knew that if we encountered whatever was out there, numbers wouldn't make a damn bit of difference. It was on one of these patrols, in late November, that we had our first real confrontation with the creature. We were checking some of the remote campsites, making sure they were properly closed down for the winter. The day had started clear and cold. But as afternoon wore on, a heavy mist rolled in, blanketing the forest in an eerie, white shroud. We'd just finished securing the last campsite on our list and were heading back to our vehicle when Jenna suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. "Ron," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Do you hear that?" I strained my ears, at first hearing nothing but the soft patter of mist on leaves. But then I caught it. A low rumbling sound, almost like a growl, but deeper, more wrong somehow. It seemed to be coming from all around us, as if the very forest itself was growling. We stood back to back, our rifles ready, scanning the mist-shrouded trees. The growling grew louder, closer. I could feel Jenna trembling against my back, or maybe it was me who was shaking. The mist seemed to thicken, swirling around us in patterns that hurt the eyes to look at. And then we saw it. It emerged from the mist like a nightmare-given form. Massive, easily 8 feet tall, with a body that seemed to shift and change as we watched. One moment it was covered in thick matted fur. The next it seemed almost skeletal, with skin stretched tight over impossible angles and planes. But it was the face that haunted me. That face that wasn't a face at all, but a twisted parody of one. Eyes that glowed with an unholy yellow light. A mouth that was too wide, filled with teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. For a moment that stretched into eternity, we stood there, frozen. The creature regarded us with those burning eyes, and I felt the weight of an intelligence that was utterly alien, utterly hostile to everything we were. Then Jenna fired. The sound of the rifle was deafening in the mist-muffled forest. The creature staggered back, black ichor spurting from a wound in its chest. But instead of falling, it roared, a sound that shook the trees and sent birds scattering in panic. We both opened fire then, our training taking over. Bullet after bullet slammed into the creature, each one drawing more of that black, oily blood. But it kept coming, its form seeming to flow around the wounds, healing even as we inflicted them. It was almost upon us when I heard the thunder of more gunfire. A group of figures burst from the mist, other rangers drawn by the sound of our shots. The creature, faced with this new threat, let out one final earth-shaking roar before melting back into the mist. We stood there, panting, our ears ringing from the gunfire. The other rangers approached cautiously, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. What? What the hell was that thing? One of the other rangers, a young guy named Mike, asked. Nobody answered. What could we say? How could we explain what we'd just seen? What we'd just fought? In the days that followed, the park went into lockdown. The few remaining tourists were quietly but firmly escorted out, citing environmental hazards. We rangers were sworn to secrecy, told to report any and all sightings directly to a special task force that had been brought in. The task force, led by the same Agent Hawkins I'd met before, set up a command center in one of the old lodges. They brought in equipment I'd never seen before, machines that beeped and whirred, measuring things I couldn't even begin to understand. Jenna and I were debriefed separately, our accounts recorded and analyzed. I could tell they were looking for inconsistencies, for signs that we might be exaggerating or imagining things. But our stories matched up perfectly. How could they not? The memory of that creature was burned into our minds, impossible to forget or misremember. As winter settled in earnest over Yellowstone, the hunt for the creature began in earnest. We rangers were paired with members of Hawkins' team, our local knowledge combined with their high-tech equipment and military training. The park, always a place of wonder and beauty to me, took on a sinister aspect. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every unexplained sound a potential encounter. The familiar trails and landmarks became a treacherous battleground in a war against an enemy we barely understood. It was on one of these patrols, deep in the Lamar Valley, that we had our next major encounter. I was paired with one of Hawkins' men, a taciturn ex-Navy SEAL named Rodriguez. We'd been tracking unusual heat signatures picked up by their satellite imaging, following a trail that led us deeper and deeper into the backcountry. The day was bitterly cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you wonder if you'll ever be warm again. Our breath frosted in the air, and the snow crunched under our boots as we made our way through a dense stand of pines. Rodriguez suddenly held up a hand, signaling me to stop. He pointed to a clearing ahead, where the snow was disturbed in a way that made my heart race. The tracks were massive, easily twice the size of a grizzly's, and they seemed to shift and change even as we watched. We approached cautiously, weapons at the ready. The clearing was silent, too silent. Even the ever-present wind seemed to have died down, leaving us in a bubble of unnatural quiet. That's when we saw it. At first I thought it was just another snow-covered log, but then it moved. The creature uncoiled itself, rising to its full height. In the stark daylight, it was even more terrifying than I remembered. Its form seemed to constantly shift and change, as if it couldn't decide what shape it wanted to be. One moment it was covered in thick matted fur, the next it was almost skeletal, with skin stretched tight over impossible angles. Rodriguez didn't hesitate. He opened fire, the sound of his high-powered rifle shattering the unnatural silence. The creature roared, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, and charged. What followed was a blur of violence and terror. We emptied our weapons into the thing, but it kept coming. I saw Rodriguez go down, swatted aside like a rag doll by one massive clawed hand. Then it was on me. The stench of it was overwhelming, a mix of rotting meat and something older, more alien. Its face, if you could call it that, was inches from mine. Those glowing yellow eyes bored into me, and I felt the weight of an intelligence that was utterly inhuman, utterly malevolent. I thought I was dead. I knew I was dead. But then, just as the creature's jaws were about to close on my throat, something extraordinary happened. The air itself seemed to tear open. There was a sound like reality breaking, and a blinding light that seared my eyes even through closed lids. When I could see again, the creature was gone. In its place was nothing. A void in the shape of the creature, as if it had been cut out of the world. Rodriguez and I were airlifted out, both of us in shock. The official report said we'd had a close encounter with a bear, but we knew better. Something had happened out there in the Lamar Valley, something that defied explanation. In the weeks that followed, more strange events occurred. Portals like the one we'd seen began opening up all over the park. Sometimes they'd spit out more creatures. Other times they'd suck things in, trees, rocks, even water from the rivers and lakes. Hawkins's team worked around the clock trying to understand what was happening. They brought in scientists, theologians, even a few people who looked more like New Age mystics than government agents. The truth, when it finally came out, was stranger than anything we could have imagined. Yellowstone, it turned out, wasn't just a national park. It wasn't even just a supervolcano. It was a nexus, a weak point in the fabric of reality. The geothermal activity that made the park famous was just a side effect of the real energy that pulsed beneath the surface, the energy of other dimensions pressing against our own. The creature, or creatures as we now knew, weren't from our world at all. They were from somewhere else, someplace so alien, so utterly foreign to our reality, that merely existing in our dimension caused them pain and drove them to lash out. But why now? Why, after millennia of relative peace, was the veil between worlds suddenly thinning? The answer, ironically, lay in our efforts to protect the park. The changing climate, the careful management of wildlife populations, even our efforts to prevent wildfires, all of it had upset a delicate balance. We'd been so focused on preserving the Yellowstone we could see that we'd inadvertently weakened the barriers holding back the Yellowstone we couldn't see. The knowledge of what we were really dealing with didn't make our job any easier. If anything, it made it harder. How do you fight something that, by its very nature, doesn't fully exist in your reality? But fight we did. Rangers and special forces, scientists and shamans, all working together in a desperate bid to close the rifts and drive the creatures back to their own dimension. It all came to a head on a cold, clear night in February. The largest rift yet had opened near Old Faithful, a gaping wound in reality that pulsed with otherworldly light. Creatures poured through, more than we'd ever seen before. I was there, along with Jenna, Hawkins, and what felt like every able-bodied person left in the park. We had weapons blessed by priests, coated in mixtures concocted by scientists, imbued with energies by the New Age mystics. Whether by faith, science, or sheer desperate belief, they worked. The battle was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Reality itself seemed to warp and bend around us. I saw things that night that my mind still shies away from, horrors that defy description. But we held the line. Inch by bloody inch, we drove them back. And then, just when it seemed we might be overwhelmed, Old Faithful erupted. But it wasn't water that shot into the sky. It was light, pure and blinding. The geyser had always been a gateway, we realized. Not just to the geothermal wonders beneath the park, but to the very energy of our world. The light engulfed everything. I heard the creatures shriek, their cries fading as they were driven back through the rift. And then, with a sound like 1,000 thunderclaps, the rift slammed shut. In the aftermath, as we tended to our wounded and tried to make sense of what had happened, I looked out over the park. Steam rose from the ground. The trees stood silent under their blanket of snow. And in the distance, a herd of bison grazed peacefully, as if nothing had happened. Yellowstone had protected itself, I realized. It had used us, all of us, as instruments to restore the balance. We hadn't saved the park. The park had saved itself. Years have passed since that night. Yellowstone remains open to the public, its wonders still drawing millions of visitors each year. To most, it's just a beautiful national park, a place of geysers and wildlife and stunning vistas. But for those of us who know the truth, it's so much more. It's a boundary between worlds, a place where reality is thin and magic, for lack of a better word, is real. I'm retired now, but I still live near the park. Sometimes on quiet nights I drive up to one of the overlooks and just sit, watching the land I've come to know so well. And sometimes, if the light is just right, I think I can see something. A shimmer in the air, a hint of other worlds pressing close. Yellowstone keeps its secrets well. But for those who know where to look, who know how to listen, the truth is there. In the roar of the geysers, in the cry of the wolves, in the very land itself. This park, this wonderland, this nexus of realities, it's more than just a place. It's alive, it's aware, and it's watching. So if you visit Yellowstone, enjoy its beauty, marvel at its wonders. But remember, you're not just in a national park. You're standing on the border between worlds, and sometimes, just sometimes, the border looks back. I'd caught myself sitting in my patrol car waiting for something to happen more times than I could count. There's a particular kind of boredom that comes with working in a town like Miller's Bluff. Kentucky, population 450. Most nights, I'd just drive around listening to the radio, occasionally stopping by the local diner for coffee strong enough to strip paint. The dashboard clock read 11:43 p.m. as I parked near the intersection of Route 14 and Old Mill Road. May 1996. The air hung heavy with the promise of summer, but spring hadn't fully released its grip on our little corner of Kentucky. I rolled down the window and lit a cigarette, watching the smoke curl upward into the night sky. 10 years on the job in Miller's Bluff had taught me patience. I knew every face, every name, every story in this town. Sheriff Wilson had hired me right out of the academy, said he liked my no-nonsense attitude. In reality, I think he just needed someone who could work weekends when he wanted to go fishing. Our department consisted of just 4 people. Sheriff Wilson, myself and 2 other deputies, Pete Garrison and Sandra Beckman. We rotated shifts, though shifts was a generous term for our loose schedule. Miller's Bluff wasn't exactly a hotbed of criminal activity. Most of our calls involved drunk drivers, minor disputes between neighbors, or the occasional shoplifter at Hank's General Store. The jail, if you could call it that, had 1 cell and rarely saw occupants beyond Friday night drunks who were usually released by Sunday morning. I knew whose dog ran loose on Tuesdays, Mrs. Keller's retriever, which teenagers liked to sneak beers by the creek, the Dawson boys, and who was feuding with whom, the Mitchells and the Reardons, over a property line dispute going on 15 years. I took another drag of my cigarette and watched a moth dance around the streetlight. The radio crackled with static but no calls. Pete had left about an hour earlier after we'd moved a dead deer off the highway, the most excitement we'd had all week. I was about to start another loop around town when the radio came to life. "Garrett? You there?" It was Hank, and something in his voice made me sit up straighter. I grabbed the radio. "Yeah, Hank, what's up?" "You might want to check in on Marla Smith. She's been calling around town looking for Dale. Says he didn't come home tonight. Went out to the old quarry and never came back, Dale Smith." I knew him well enough, mid-40s. Worked maintenance at the high school. Liked his whiskey a little too much on weekends. Not the type to cause trouble, but not always the most reliable husband either. "He probably just lost track of time," I said, though something in Hank's tone made me uneasy. "But I'll stop by, thanks." "She sounds pretty worried." I tossed my cigarette out the window and started the car. The Smiths lived in a small house on the edge of town, one of those places that had seen better days but was kept neat through sheer determination. Their porch light was on when I pulled into the gravel driveway, and Marla Smith appeared at the door before I'd even shut off the engine. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest, her face tight with worry. Marla wasn't the type to panic easily. I'd known her since high school. She was 2 years behind me, quiet but smart. She'd married Dale right after graduation, and they'd settled into the kind of unremarkable small-town life that defined most of Miller's Bluff. "Evening, Marla," I said, climbing the porch steps. "Hank said you were looking for Dale?" She nodded, her fingers digging into her arms. "He went out this morning. Said he was heading to the old quarry. Wanted to check something out. He was supposed to be back for dinner." "Did he say what he was checking out?" "No." She shook her head. "But he took his hunting rifle, which was strange. It's not hunting season." That detail caught my attention. Dale wasn't the type to carry a weapon without reason. "I called his buddy Roy," she continued. "He hasn't seen him. I called everyone I could think of. I took out my notepad, more for show than anything else. What time did he leave?" "Around 9 this morning. Said he'd be back by 5. "And his truck?" "The blue Ford?" "That's the one he took." I nodded, tucking the notepad away. "I'll drive out to the quarry, see if he's still there. Maybe got a flat tire or something." Relief flashed across her face. "Thanks, Garrett." "Lock your doors," I said, not sure why those words came out. "I'll radio once I find him." As I drove toward the quarry, the unease that had been simmering since Hank's call began to grow. Miller's Quarry had been abandoned for almost 20 years. The limestone operation had shut down in the late 70s after an accident killed 3 workers. Since then, it had become just another forgotten place, overgrown and crumbling, the kind of spot teenagers visited on dares or couples used for privacy. But not Dale Smith. Dale wasn't the adventurous type, and he certainly wasn't a teenager looking for thrills. What would bring him out here with a rifle? The road to the quarry was barely maintained. More dirt than gravel now, with weeds growing up the middle. My headlights caught the reflective strips of the no trespassing signs posted along the fence line, most of them tilted or fallen over. The perimeter fence itself had long since been cut through in multiple places. After about a mile down this road, I saw it. Dale's blue Ford pickup parked near the main entrance to the quarry. Empty. I pulled up behind it, the beams of my headlights illuminating the abandoned truck. A sense of dread settled over me, heavy and cold despite the mild spring night. I radioed dispatch, which at this hour was just Sandra sitting alone at the station. "Sandra, I'm at Miller's Quarry. Found Dale Smith's truck, but no sign of him. I'm going to look around." "Copy that," she replied, her voice tinny through the speaker. "Want me to call Pete in?" I hesitated. "No, not yet. Probably just wandered off. I'll radio if I need backup." I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the car. The night had grown still, unnaturally so. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves, just silence broken only by the creak of old quarry equipment in the distant darkness. The beam of my flashlight caught the ground near Dale's truck. Footprints in the soft earth led toward the main pit. I followed them, calling out, "Dale? Dale Smith? It's Deputy Garrett." My voice echoed back at me, hollow and distorted. No response. The quarry spread out before me, a massive pit dug into the earth, surrounded by rusted machinery and piles of broken limestone. The moonlight cast everything in a pale glow, creating deep shadows where anything could hide. I moved forward cautiously, sweeping my flashlight back and forth. Dale's footprints continued toward the edge of the pit. I followed them, calling his name again, louder this time. The wind picked up, whistling through the abandoned structures and making me jump at every sound. I'd reached the edge of the quarry pit when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong, something being dragged across gravel, heavy and deliberate. It wasn't the wind, and it certainly wasn't an animal I recognized. "Dale?" I called again, my hand instinctively moving to my service weapon. The sound stopped, then started again, closer now. I swung my flashlight toward it, the beam cutting through the darkness at the bottom of the pit. Something moved down there. Something big. For the briefest moment, my light caught it, a shape low to the ground, pale and wrong in ways I couldn't immediately process. It was dragging something behind it, something that left a dark smear on the ground. I crouched down, trying to get a better look, when the thing suddenly stopped and seemed to sense me. It turned, or what I assumed was turning, and for a split second, I saw what it was dragging Dale Smith, or what remained of him. His body was twisted and broken, his face barely recognizable through the blood and dirt. His flannel shirt was torn to shreds, and his shotgun lay useless beside him. My stomach lurched, and I stumbled backward, nearly falling. I fumbled for my radio with shaking hands. "Sandra," I whispered urgently. "We've got a situation. I found Dale. He's dead. Something..." I couldn't even find the words to describe what I'd seen. "Something killed him." "What do you mean, something?" Sandra's voice had an edge of panic now. Before I could answer, I felt it, that crawling sensation of being watched, of being hunted, that primitive part of my brain screaming danger before my conscious mind could process why. And then it emerged from the shadows at the bottom of the quarry, moving with a speed that defied its size. In the beam of my flashlight, I caught glimpses of it, a body too large and too wrong to be any animal I'd ever seen. Skin stretched pale and taut over a frame that seemed to shift and contort as it moved. It was coming straight for me. I don't remember consciously deciding to run. One moment I was frozen in place, staring at the thing climbing up from the pit, and the next I was sprinting back toward my patrol car, heart pounding in my ears. My flashlight slipped from my grip, tumbling down into the quarry, its beam cutting wild arcs through the darkness as it fell. In those flashes of light I caught more glimpses of the creature, its body low to the ground but massive, moving with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for its size. Its skin was pale and waxy, stretched over a frame that seemed wrong in ways I couldn't articulate, but it was its face that would haunt me for years to come. In that brief, terrible moment when my falling flashlight illuminated it, I saw something that shouldn't exist. A visage that resembled a long-dead corpse pulled from water, features distorted and melted with eyes that reflected the light like pools of oil. I heard it behind me, gaining ground with each passing second. The scraping, dragging sound was louder now, punctuated by something that might have been breathing but sounded more like wet cloth being torn. I reached for my gun as I ran, pulling it free from its holster. The weight of it in my hand offered little comfort. What good would bullets do against whatever this was? Still, when I heard the thing closing in, I spun around and fired 3 shots in rapid succession. The muzzle flash briefly illuminated the area, and I saw the creature recoil, not from being hit but from the light itself. It let out a sound, not a growl or a roar, but something between a hiss and the creaking of old wood, before slinking back into the shadows. That moment of hesitation was all I needed. I turned and sprinted the remaining distance to my patrol car, fumbling with the keys as I reached it. The door had barely closed behind me when something slammed into the side of the vehicle with enough force to rock it on its wheels. The metal of the door dented inward with a sickening crunch. I jammed the key into the ignition and the engine roared to life. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of something pale sliding across the hood, leaving a trail of dark fluid that might have been blood. Dale's blood. I floored the accelerator, tires spinning in the loose gravel before finding purchase. The patrol car lurched forward and I felt a heavy weight slide off the hood. In the rearview mirror, I saw nothing but darkness, but I could feel it watching me retreat. My hands shook so badly I could barely keep the car on the road. The radio crackled with Sandra's voice calling my name, asking for an update, but I couldn't find the words to respond. What could I possibly say that wouldn't sound like the ravings of a madman? It wasn't until I reached the main road that I finally keyed the radio. Sandra, I managed, my voice barely steady. Call Pete, call Sheriff Wilson. Tell them, I swallowed hard. Tell them Dale Smith is dead and we need a team out at the quarry. And tell them to bring spotlights. Lots of them. Garrett, what happened? Are you hurt? Just do it, I snapped, then immediately regretted my tone. Please, I'll explain when I get back. I should have gone straight to the station, but instead, I found myself pulling up to the Smith residence. The porch light was still on, and I could see Marla's silhouette through the curtains waiting. I sat in the car for several long minutes trying to compose myself, trying to find the words to tell a woman that her husband was dead, killed by something I couldn't even begin to explain. When I finally stepped onto the porch, Marla opened the door before I could knock. One look at my face told her everything she needed to know. No, she whispered, backing away. No, no, no. I caught her as her knees buckled, guiding her to the couch in the small living room. I'm so sorry, Marla, I said, the words inadequate and hollow. What happened? She asked, her voice barely audible. Was it an accident? I hesitated. What could I tell her? That something inhuman had torn her husband apart? That I'd fired at it and run like a coward? We don't know all the details yet, I said carefully. I found him at the quarry. He didn't suffer. This last part was a lie, but a necessary one. Marla's eyes searched my face, and I had the uncomfortable feeling she knew I was hiding something. There's more, isn't there? She asked. Before I could answer, the radio on my belt crackled to life. Garrett, come in. Pete's voice tense and urgent. I excused myself, stepping onto the porch to respond. I'm here. We're at the quarry, Pete said. There's a lot of blood, but no body. And what happened to your flashlight? We found it smashed to pieces at the bottom of the pit. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean, no body? Dale was there. I saw him. Well, he's not here now. Just blood and... Pete's voice dropped. Drag marks leading into the old access tunnels. Sheriff says we're not going in there tonight. Not without proper equipment and more men. The access tunnels. I'd forgotten about them. A network of passages carved into the limestone that connected different parts of the quarry operation. They'd been abandoned along with everything else, left to crumble and collapse. What about tracks? I asked. Do you see any tracks that don't look human? A long pause. What kind of question is that, Garrett? What exactly did you see out here? I closed my eyes, remembering the pale, distorted shape. I don't know, Pete. I really don't know. When I returned inside, Marla was sitting exactly where I'd left her, her face a mask of grief and shock. I sat beside her and took her hands in mine. Marla, did Dale mention anything unusual lately? Any reason he might have gone to the quarry with his rifle? She stared at me, confusion momentarily overriding her grief. No, nothing. Then her expression changed, as if remembering something. Wait, he did mention hearing something strange a few nights ago. He was out back splitting wood and said he heard noises coming from the direction of the quarry. Said it sounded like... She frowned, trying to recall his exact words. Like something big moving around in the trees. Did he describe it? She shook her head. He just said it gave him the creeps. I told him it was probably just a bear, but he said it sounded wrong. She squeezed my hand suddenly. Garrett, what killed my husband? I couldn't meet her eyes. I don't know, I said, and it wasn't entirely a lie. I didn't know what that thing was, only that it wasn't anything that should exist in our world. I stayed with Marla until her sister arrived, then headed to the station. The small building that housed the Millers Bluff Police Department was buzzing with activity when I arrived. Unusual for any time, but especially at nearly 2 in the morning. Sheriff Wilson was at his desk, his face grim as he spoke on the phone. Pete and Sandra stood nearby, both looking shaken. They all turned to look at me as I entered. "There you are," Sheriff Wilson said, hanging up the phone. "Want to tell me what the hell happened out there? And what's this about seeing something that killed Dale?" I sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "I don't know how to explain it, Sheriff. I saw something at the quarry, something that had killed Dale and was dragging his body. It wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal I've ever seen." "What was it then?" Pete asked, his skepticism evident. I shook my head. "I don't know. It was big, pale, moved wrong, almost like..." I struggled to find the comparison. Like something that should be dead but isn't. The room fell silent. Sheriff Wilson leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "You're saying some kind of monster killed Dale Smith?" When he put it that way, it sounded ridiculous, the kind of story that belonged around a campfire. Not in a police report, but I knew what I'd seen. "I'm saying something killed him, and we need to find out what it is before it kills someone else." Sheriff Wilson rubbed his face. "All right. In the morning, we'll get a proper search team together, go back to the quarry and find Dale's body. Then we'll figure out what happened." He fixed me with a stern look. "And Garrett? Not a word of this monster talk to anyone else. Last thing we need is panic spreading through town." I nodded, though I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Whatever I'd encountered at the quarry, it wasn't going away. And I had the sinking feeling this was just the beginning. Morning came too quickly. The pale light of dawn filtering through my bedroom blinds as I lay wide awake. Every creak and settling noise in my small house making me tense. I hadn't slept. Couldn't sleep. With the image of that thing burned into my mind. I showered, the hot water doing little to wash away the feeling of being watched that had followed me home from the quarry. As I dressed, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror, pale with dark circles under my eyes, looking like a man who'd seen a ghost. Or worse. The phone rang just as I was about to leave, making me jump. It was Sheriff Wilson. "Garrett, we're heading out to the quarry in 30 minutes. Meet us at the station. I'll be there, I promised, though part of me wanted nothing more than to get in my car and drive as far from Miller's Bluff as possible. The station was already a flurry of activity when I arrived. Sheriff Wilson had called in not just our small department, but also several volunteers from the fire department and a few locals who knew the area well. Nearly a dozen men in total, armed with shotguns and rifles. Pete approached me as I entered, his expression guarded. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice low. "You doing okay?" "You look like hell." "I'm fine," I lied. "Any news from the quarry?" He shook his head. "Nothing yet. Sheriff sent Roy Burke out at first light to keep an eye on the place. No sign of, well, whatever you saw." There was doubt in his voice, unspoken but clear as day. He didn't believe me, not really. None of them did. Sheriff Wilson gathered everyone around, spreading a map of the quarry across his desk. "All right, listen up. We're looking for the body of Dale Smith, presumably somewhere in or around the old access tunnels here." He pointed to a section of the map. "We go in groups of at least 3. Nobody wanders off alone, nobody plays hero. Clear?" A chorus of clear echoed through the room. He looked up, his gaze finding mine. "Garrett, you're with me and Pete. You're going to show us exactly where you found Dale last night." The drive to the quarry was tense, no one speaking much beyond necessary communications over the radio. I sat in the passenger seat of Sheriff Wilson's cruiser, watching the familiar landscape roll by, everything looking so normal in the daylight that I almost could have convinced myself last night had been a nightmare. Almost. The quarry, too, looked different by day, less ominous, just an abandoned industrial site slowly being reclaimed by nature. Dale's truck was still there, now surrounded by police tape. My patrol car from the night before had been driven back to the station by Sandra, but I could still see the dent in the door where that thing had slammed into it. The search team spread out according to Sheriff Wilson's plan. Our group headed straight for the edge of the quarry pit where I'd first spotted Dale's body. "Here," I said, pointing to the spot where the ground was dark with dried blood. "This is where I saw him." Sheriff Wilson crouched down, examining the stained earth and the drag marks leading toward the access tunnels. "And you say something was dragging him?" I nodded. "It was pulling him toward those tunnels." Pete was a few feet away, his gaze sweeping the area. "Sheriff," he called, "you should see this." We joined him, and I felt my blood run cold. On the ground were prints unlike any animal tracks I'd ever seen. Large, with what looked like elongated fingers or claws, but the shape was all wrong, as if whatever made them walked on knuckles rather than paws or feet. Sheriff Wilson stared at the tracks for a long moment. "Mountain lion, maybe? They've been known to drag their prey." I shook my head. "That's not from any mountain lion." For the first time, I saw doubt flicker across the sheriff's face, uncertainty replacing skepticism. "Let's follow these tracks," he said at last. "See where they lead." They led, as I'd expected, to the entrance of the access tunnels, a dark opening in the quarry wall, partially collapsed and overgrown with vegetation. The tracks disappeared into the darkness beyond. "We're going to need lights," Sheriff Wilson said, unslinging a powerful flashlight from his belt. Pete and I did the same. "Sheriff," I said hesitantly, "whatever killed Dale, it didn't like light. When I fired my gun last night, the muzzle flash made it back off." He gave me a long look, then nodded. Noted. The tunnel entrance smelled of damp stone and decay, the air noticeably cooler as we stepped inside. Our flashlight beams cut through the darkness, illuminating walls of rough-hewn limestone streaked with mineral deposits that glittered like stars. The tracks continued, clearer here in the soft earth of the tunnel floor. Alongside them, the drag marks left a continuous trail of disturbed dirt and occasional dark stains that could only be blood. We'd gone perhaps 50 yards into the tunnel when Pete suddenly stopped. "Listen," he whispered. We froze, straining our ears. At first I heard nothing but the distant drip of water somewhere deeper in the tunnels. Then I caught it, a soft rhythmic sound like something breathing, but wet and labored. "It's coming from up ahead," Sheriff Wilson murmured, his hand moving to his sidearm. The tunnel widened into a small chamber, the ceiling rising high above us, supported by rough stone pillars left by the quarry workers. Our flashlight beams danced across the walls, revealing nothing but more limestone and darkness. Then Pete's light caught something, a pale shape huddled in the corner of the chamber. For a terrible moment, I thought it was the creature from the night before, but as the beam steadied, I realized it was Dale's body, or what remained of it. He lay crumpled against the wall, his body torn and broken, chest cavity splayed open and hollow. His face was frozen in an expression of pure terror, eyes wide and staring at nothing. "Jesus," Pete whispered, turning away. Sheriff Wilson approached the body cautiously, his face grim. What the hell did this to him? The breathing sound had stopped. The silence that replaced it was somehow worse, pressing against my ears like a physical weight. "We need to get him out of here," I said, the words catching in my throat. Sheriff Wilson nodded. "Pete, radio the others. Tell them we found Dale and need the extraction team." Pete stepped away to make the call, his voice echoing strangely in the chamber. I moved closer to Dale's body, forcing myself to look, to search for any clues about what had killed him. That's when I noticed something strange. Marks on the limestone wall behind the body. Not random scratches, but deliberate lines carved into the stone. They formed a crude symbol, something like a circle with a vertical line through it. "Sheriff," I called, pointing to the marks. "Look at this," he leaned in, frowning. "What is that? Some kind of graffiti?" "I don't think so. These look fresh." Before he could respond, Pete returned. "Team's on their way. Should be here in 10 minutes. Sheriff Wilson straightened up. "Good, let's secure the—" A sound cut him off. The same dragging, scraping noise I'd heard the night before, coming from deeper in the tunnels. All three of us spun toward it, flashlights aimed into the darkness. "What was that?" Pete asked, his voice tight. I knew exactly what it was. "We need to leave, now." The sound came again, closer this time, accompanied by that wet, labored breathing. Our flashlight beams caught nothing but empty tunnel. "Move," Sheriff Wilson ordered, drawing his weapon. "Back to the entrance now." We began retreating, walking backward, eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. Pete was first, followed by me, with Sheriff Wilson bringing up the rear. We'd made it halfway back to the entrance when the lights began to flicker. First Pete's, then mine, then the sheriff's. "What the hell?" Pete muttered, shaking his flashlight. The beam steadied momentarily, then died completely, plunging us into absolute darkness. I felt panic rising in my chest, remembering how the creature had recoiled from light. "Everyone stay calm," Sheriff Wilson said, his voice steady despite the situation. "Keep moving toward the entrance. We can still see daylight from here." It was true. A faint grayish glow marked the tunnel entrance perhaps 30 yards away. We quickened our pace nearly at a run now when I heard it, the sound of something moving in the darkness behind us, fast and purposeful. "Run!" I shouted, abandoning all pretense of calm. We sprinted for the entrance, the sounds of pursuit growing louder with each step. I could hear Sheriff Wilson's labored breathing behind me, followed by a sudden cry and the sound of a body hitting the ground. "Sheriff!" Pete shouted, stopping and turning back. "Go!" Wilson's voice strained but commanding. "Get out!" I grabbed Pete's arm, pulling him toward the entrance. "We need light," I gasped. "Lots of it." We burst out of the tunnel into the daylight, immediately turning to face the darkness we'd fled. For several agonizing seconds, there was nothing but silence from the tunnel. Then Sheriff Wilson emerged, stumbling and limping, his face sheet white. "It's in there," he panted. I saw it. God help me, I saw it. Before we could respond, other search team members came running, drawn by our shouts. They surrounded us, questions flying fast and furious. "What happened? Where's Dale? Did you find something?" Sheriff Wilson held up a hand, silencing them. "Dale's body is in a chamber about 50 yards in, and there's something else in there with him." He looked at me, his expression grim. Garrett was right. Whatever it is, it's not natural. A murmur ran through the assembled men, a mixture of disbelief and fear. "We need more lights," I said. "Powerful ones. And weapons." Roy Burke, a local hunter who'd known Dale for years, stepped forward. "What exactly are we dealing with here, Sheriff?" Sheriff Wilson hesitated, clearly struggling with how to explain what he'd seen. "I don't know, but it killed Dale and it's dangerous." He turned to the group. "I want 4 volunteers with rifles to come with us back into that tunnel. Everyone else form a perimeter around the entrance. Nothing gets out without going through you." Men shuffled, exchanging nervous glances, but several stepped forward, Roy among them. As they gathered weapons and flashlights, Pete pulled me aside. "What did he see in there?" he asked quietly. "He looks like he's seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," I replied. "Something worse." Within 20 minutes we were ready, 7 of us in total, armed with shotguns, rifles, and the most powerful flashlights we could find. Sheriff Wilson, despite his obvious limp, insisted on leading us back into the tunnel. "Remember," he said as we approached the entrance, "light seems to repel it. Keep those beams steady and stay together." We entered the darkness once more, the combined power of our flashlights pushing back the shadows more effectively than before. The tunnel felt different now, colder and filled with a subtle vibration, as if the very rock was humming with energy. We reached the spot where Sheriff Wilson had fallen. There was blood on the ground, his blood, but something else as well, more of those strange tracks and what looked like a viscous, colorless fluid that glistened in our flashlight beams. "What is that?" Roy asked, crouching down for a closer look. "Don't touch it," I warned. "We don't know what it is." We continued to the chamber where we'd found Dale's body, moving more cautiously now. The chamber appeared empty when we entered, our lights sweeping across the walls. Then Roy shouted in alarm, his flashlight beam fixed on the corner where Dale had been. The body was gone. The disappearance of Dale's body sent a ripple of panic through our group. We stood in the empty chamber, flashlight beams cutting frantically through the darkness, illuminating nothing but limestone walls and the bloodstain where his body had lain. Could it have dragged the body deeper into the tunnels? Pete suggested, his voice tight with tension. Sheriff Wilson shook his head. "We would have seen drag marks." He pointed to the floor with his flashlight. "Look, the blood trail stops here." He was right. The only signs of disturbance were our own footprints from earlier and those strange inhuman tracks that belonged to whatever had killed Dale. "And what about these?" I said, directing my light to the symbol carved into the wall, the circle with a vertical line through it. "Anyone recognize this?" Roy stepped closer, squinting at the marks. "Looks like the old mining symbols. They used to mark dangerous areas or places where the rock was unstable." "This doesn't look like any mining symbol I've ever seen," Sheriff Wilson replied. As we debated, I noticed something, a thin stream of that viscous, colorless fluid running down the wall from the carved symbol, pooling on the ground below. I moved closer, careful not to touch it. "Sheriff," I called. "This substance, it's coming from the symbol itself." He joined me, examining the fluid with a frown. "What the hell is going on here?" A sound from deeper in the tunnel silenced our discussion. The same dragging noise, but now accompanied by something new. A low, almost subsonic vibration that I felt more than heard, resonating in my chest like the lowest note on a pipe organ. "It's coming back," Pete whispered, raising his shotgun. "Hold steady," Sheriff Wilson ordered. "Keep your lights on the tunnel entrance." We formed a semicircle, weapons ready, every flashlight trained on the dark passage leading deeper into the earth. The dragging sound grew louder, the vibration more intense until I could feel my teeth buzzing in my skull. Then it appeared, emerging from the darkness with a fluid, unnatural motion. In the harsh glare of our combined flashlights, I finally got a clear look at what had killed Dale Smith. It was roughly the size of a bear, but shaped all wrong. A pale, elongated body that seemed to flow rather than walk, supporting itself on limbs that bent at impossible angles. Its skin was waxy and translucent, streaked with dark veins that pulsed with each movement. Where a head should have been, there was only a featureless bulge with a horizontal slash that might have been a mouth. The thing recoiled from our lights, that slash opening to reveal rows of teeth like shards of broken glass. It let out a sound, that same wet, labored breathing I'd heard before, but louder now, almost like words in a language I couldn't understand. "Fire!" Sheriff Wilson shouted, and we opened up with everything we had. The gunfire was deafening in the confined space, muzzle flashes strobing the chamber in bursts of harsh light. The creature writhed and thrashed under the assault, that colorless fluid spraying from multiple wounds. For a moment, I thought we had it. The thing retreated, seeming to fold in on itself as it slithered back into the darkness of the tunnel. The gunfire ceased, leaving only the ringing in our ears and the acrid smell of cordite. "Did we get it?" Roy asked, reloading his shotgun with shaking hands. Before anyone could answer, the vibration returned, stronger now, shaking loose dirt and small stones from the ceiling. The ground beneath our feet trembled. "Everyone out," Sheriff Wilson yelled. "Now!" We didn't need to be told twice. We ran for the entrance, flashlight beams bouncing wildly off the tunnel walls. Behind us, I could hear the sound of rock cracking, followed by a rush of air as something gave way. We were nearly at the entrance when the first section of tunnel collapsed, sending a cloud of dust billowing toward us. Daylight was visible ahead, tantalizing in its promise of safety. "Go, go, go," Sheriff Wilson urged, pushing us forward. We burst out into the sunlight just as another section of tunnel came down, the entrance disappearing in a cascade of limestone and dirt. The men who had been maintaining the perimeter rushed forward, faces pale with shock. "What happened?" asked one of the fire department volunteers. "We heard shooting, then the whole ground started shaking." Sheriff Wilson sank to his knees, coughing from the dust that coated his uniform. "It was down there," he managed between coughs. "Just like Garrett said, something not natural." I helped him to his feet, my own hands trembling with adrenaline and fear. "Did we kill it?" He shook his head. "I don't know, but I think we just made it angry." In the hours that followed, we established a secure perimeter around the quarry. Sheriff Wilson called in additional help from the county sheriff's department, and by nightfall, the entire site was cordoned off with police tape and armed officers. Dale's body was still missing, and the access tunnel remained collapsed, sealing off whatever lurked within, at least for now. Sheriff Wilson had been on the phone most of the afternoon, trying to explain the situation to increasingly skeptical county officials who wanted to know why he needed reinforcements for what appeared to be a simple missing person case gone wrong. I sat in my patrol car, writing up my report and trying to make sense of what we'd seen. The image of that creature kept replaying in my mind, along with the strange symbol carved into the wall. There was a connection there, I was sure of it, but I couldn't see what it was. A tap on my window startled me. It was Pete holding 2 cups of coffee. I rolled down the window and he handed me one. "Thought you could use this," he said, leaning against the car. "Sheriff's going crazy trying to explain this to the county boys. They think we're all suffering from mass hysteria or something." I took a sip of the coffee, grateful for its warmth. "Can you blame them?" "If someone had told me this story a day ago, I'd have thought they were nuts." Pete nodded, his gaze drifting toward the quarry. "What do you think that thing was?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm going to find out." "How?" "The tunnels collapsed." I hesitated, then decided to share my thoughts. "That symbol on the wall, I need to know what it means. And I need to learn more about the quarry's history. There might be something there, some explanation for what's happening." Pete sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Old man Jenkins might know something. He worked at the quarry for 30 years before it shut down. It was a good suggestion. Martin Jenkins was in his 80s now, living in a small house on the edge of town. If anyone knew the quarry's secrets, it would be him. I'll talk to him tomorrow, I said. Right now, we need to make sure nothing gets out of that quarry. Pete's expression darkened. You think it could find another way out? The question had been haunting me since the tunnel collapsed. I think we need to assume it can. Night fell over Miller's Bluff, bringing with it a tension that hung in the air like a storm about to break. The quarry was quiet, illuminated by powerful floodlights that the county team had brought in. Armed officers patrolled the perimeter, their faces grim in the artificial glare. I took the first watch, sitting in my patrol car with a thermos of coffee and a shotgun across my lap. The radio occasionally crackled with updates from other officers, but there was no sign of the creature. Around midnight, Sheriff Wilson joined me, sliding into the passenger seat with a heavy sigh. He looked exhausted. The events of the day etched into the lines of his face. County's sending a specialist team tomorrow, he said, rubbing his eyes. Some kind of hazardous materials unit. They think we might be dealing with toxic gas causing hallucinations. I snorted. You saw that thing, Sheriff. That wasn't a hallucination, I know. But what am I supposed to tell them? That we've got a monster living in our quarry? He shook his head. They'd have me committed. We sat in silence for a while, watching the floodlights cast long shadows across the abandoned equipment. Pete mentioned Old Man Jenkins, I said eventually. Thought he might know something about the quarry's history. Sheriff Wilson nodded. Worth a shot. There were always stories about the quarry, even when I was a kid. Most of them just the usual ghost tales, but he trailed off, seeming to consider something. You know, when the accident happened back in '78, they never did find all the bodies. This was news to me. What do you mean? 3 men died when one of the tunnels collapsed. They recovered 2 of the bodies, but the third, a guy named Victor Crane, they never found him. The tunnel was too unstable to keep searching, so they sealed it off and declared him dead. A chill ran down my spine. Which tunnel was it? Sheriff Wilson looked at me, his expression grim. The same one we were in today. The connection felt significant, though I couldn't yet see how it all fit together. I need to talk to Jenkins, I said. First thing tomorrow. I'll come with you, the sheriff replied. After what we've seen, I want answers as much as you do. The rest of the night passed without incident, but neither of us slept. When dawn broke, we handed over to the day shift and drove to Martin Jenkins' house on the outskirts of town. The old man was already up, sitting on his porch with a mug of something that steamed in the cool morning air. He didn't seem surprised to see us. Figured you'd be coming, he said as we approached. News travels fast in Miller's Bluff. Heard you had some trouble out at the quarry. Sheriff Wilson and I exchanged a glance. That's putting it mildly, Mr. Jenkins, I said. We were hoping you might be able to help us understand what's happening out there. The old man gestured to the empty chairs on his porch. Sit down. This isn't a short story. We sat and Jenkins leaned forward, his weathered face serious. That quarry was always different. Even before the accident. There was a section of limestone we weren't supposed to touch. Had those symbols carved into it, kind of like a circle with a line. My heart skipped a beat. You've seen that symbol before? He nodded. All over the deeper tunnels. Old-timers said they were put there by the original surveyors back in the 20s. Warning signs, they called them. Marking places where the rock was wrong. Wrong how? Sheriff Wilson asked. Jenkins took a sip from his mug before answering. Wrong in ways that don't make sense. Areas where the limestone was soft when it should have been hard, or where the walls would sweat that clear fluid even though there was no water source nearby. He looked at us closely. You've seen it, haven't you? That fluid? I nodded, remembering the viscous substance oozing from the walls. What is it? Nobody knows. Company scientists came out once, took samples, never told us what they found. He leaned back in his chair, but after they left, the foreman ordered those sections sealed off. Said they were unstable, but that wasn't it. Something about those areas scared them. Sheriff Wilson shifted in his seat. What about the accident in '78? The one where Victor Crane went missing? Jenkins' expression darkened. That wasn't an accident. Crane was obsessed with those symbols. Spent all his free time in the restricted tunnel studying them. Day of the so-called accident, he'd convinced 2 others to help him break through a sealed section. The collapse happened right after they got through. And they never found Crane's body, I said, remembering what Sheriff Wilson had told me. Jenkins shook his head. Never found a trace of him. But after that, things started happening around the quarry. Equipment failing for no reason. Men hearing noises in the tunnels, seeing shapes in the darkness. What kind of shapes? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Pale things, Jenkins said quietly. Things that moved wrong. Most of the men quit after a while. Couldn't handle it. Company shut the place down a year later. Said the limestone quality had dropped, but that was just an excuse. He fixed us with a penetrating stare. Whatever's in that quarry, it's been there a long time. Those symbols? They're not warnings about unstable rock. They're warnings about something else, something that lives in the limestone. And you think it's connected to Crane's disappearance? Sheriff Wilson asked. Jenkins nodded. I think he found something down there. Something that should have stayed buried. And now it's waking up. A silence fell over the porch as we absorbed his words. It sounded like the ramblings of a superstitious old man. But after what we'd seen in the quarry, I couldn't dismiss it. Is there anything else you can tell us? I asked. Anything that might help us understand what we're dealing with or how to stop it? Jenkins thought for a moment. There was one thing. Before the quarry closed, some of the men reported seeing Crane again. What do you mean, seeing him again? Sheriff Wilson demanded. I thought he was missing, presumed dead. He was, Jenkins confirmed. But they swore they saw him in the tunnels, changed somehow. Pale and wrong, like he'd been underground too long. He never spoke, just watched from the shadows. After the third sighting, management sealed the entire tunnel network permanently. I remembered the creature we'd encountered. Its pale, distorted form. The way it moved. Could it somehow be connected to Victor Crane? A man missing for nearly 20 years? Thank you, Mr. Jenkins, I said, standing. You've given us a lot to think about. As we walked back to the car, Sheriff Wilson grabbed my arm. You don't actually believe all that, do you? That some miner turned into whatever that thing is? I met his gaze steadily. After what we saw yesterday, I'm willing to consider anything. And those symbols, the fluid, it all fits with what Jenkins told us. He ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly older. So what do we do now? We go back to the quarry, I said. And we find out exactly what happened to Victor Crane. The county's hazardous materials team arrived around noon, 4 men in unmarked vans carrying equipment I didn't recognize. Their leader, a Dr. Mason, listened to our account with professional skepticism, nodding occasionally but clearly unconvinced by our monster theory. Gas pockets are common in limestone quarries, he explained, as his team set up monitoring equipment around the collapsed tunnel entrance. Hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide, even methane, they can all cause hallucinations, paranoia, and in some cases death. I think that's what we're dealing with here. Sheriff Wilson glanced at me, clearly frustrated. And what about the tracks we found? The strange fluid on the walls? Dale Smith's missing body? Dr. Mason shrugged. Animals could have taken the body. As for the rest? Well, let's wait for the test results before jumping to conclusions. I bit back a retort. There was no point arguing with someone who hadn't seen what we had. Instead, I pulled Sheriff Wilson aside while the team worked. We need to check the quarry records, I said quietly. Find out everything we can about Victor Crane and those restricted tunnels Jenkins mentioned. He nodded. County Records Office should have the original quarry surveys and accident reports. I'll make some calls. While Sheriff Wilson handled that, I returned to the station to dig through our own archives. Miller's Bluff PD kept records going back decades, though most of them were gathering dust in the basement. Sandra found me there an hour later, surrounded by boxes of yellowed papers. You okay? She asked, setting down a cup of coffee beside me. You look terrible. Thanks, I muttered, not looking up from the file I was reading. A missing person report for Victor Crane, filed by his wife on April 15, 1978. Did Pete fill you in on what happened at the quarry? She sat on the edge of the table. He tried. Said you found some kind of creature that killed Dale Smith? It all sounds crazy, I supplied, finally meeting her gaze. Yeah, I know. But we all saw it, Sandra. The sheriff, Pete, Roy, all of us. Whatever's in that quarry, it's real and it's dangerous. She didn't argue, which I appreciated. Instead, she pointed to the file in my hands. What are you looking for? I explained what we'd learned from Jenkins about Crane and the sealed tunnels. I'm trying to find any connection between Crane and what's happening now. And have you? I gestured to the files spread across the table. There's not much here, just the initial missing person report and a follow-up investigation that went nowhere. But look at this. I pulled out a photocopied map of the quarry with certain areas heavily marked. These must be the restricted sections Jenkins mentioned. Sandra leaned closer, studying the map. And that's where Dale was killed? In one of these areas, I nodded. Exactly where Crane disappeared 20 years ago. Before we could discuss it further, the phone rang upstairs. Sandra went to answer it, returning a minute later with a grim expression. That was Pete. There's been another disappearance. My stomach dropped. Who? Roy Burke. He was on patrol at the quarry perimeter last night. Radio check at 3 a.m. but didn't respond at 4. They found his truck empty with the door still open and his flashlight on the ground. I was on my feet immediately, gathering the most important files. We need to get back to the quarry. By the time we arrived, the scene was chaotic. County officers, our own deputies, and the hazmat team all milled around, sharing theories and arguing about jurisdiction. Sheriff Wilson stood by Roy's abandoned truck, his face set in a grim mask. Any sign of him? I asked as I approached. He shook his head. Nothing. But there's this. He pointed to the ground beside the truck, where a now familiar set of tracks led away from the vehicle and into the woods surrounding the quarry. The same tracks from the tunnel, I confirmed, crouching to examine them. It came out. That's impossible, Dr. Mason interjected, joining us with a handheld device that beeped intermittently. The tunnel is completely collapsed. Nothing could get through. Unless there's another way out, Sheriff Wilson suggested. Jenkins mentioned other tunnels, a whole network of them. Mason looked skeptical but didn't argue further, his attention drawn to his monitoring device, which had started beeping more rapidly. That's strange. I'm picking up elevated methane levels here, but none of our other sensors around the perimeter detected anything. I exchanged a glance with Sheriff Wilson. What does that mean? It means something's causing a localized gas leak right here, right now. Mason frowned at his device. But that shouldn't be possible unless what? I pressed, unless there's an opening nearby. A direct connection to whatever's releasing the gas. We all looked around, seeing nothing but forest and the rocky ground of the quarry's edge. Then I noticed something. A subtle movement in the earth about 20 feet away, as if the ground itself was breathing. There, I pointed. Do you see that? We approached cautiously, Mason's device beeping faster with each step. What I'd thought was solid ground turned out to be a thin crust of dirt and vegetation, covering a small opening, barely 2 feet across, but deep enough that our flashlights couldn't penetrate to the bottom. Another entrance to the tunnel system, Sheriff Wilson breathed. Roy must have found it, or it found him. Mason crouched beside the opening, his device now emitting a continuous tone. The gas concentration is highest here. I'm reading methane, hydrogen sulfide, and he frowned, tapping the device. That can't be right. What is it? I asked. The device is detecting organic compounds that don't make sense. Complex proteins that shouldn't be airborne. He looked up at us, his scientific skepticism visibly wavering. Whatever's down there, it's not just gas. Sheriff Wilson straightened, coming to a decision. We need to seal this entrance immediately, and any others we find. Then we need a proper search team to go in after Roy. You can't be serious, Mason protested. After what happened to your last team? Roy is one of ours, Sheriff Wilson said firmly. We don't leave our people behind. While Mason's team worked to temporarily seal the opening with expandable foam, I pulled Sheriff Wilson aside to share what I'd found in the archives. According to these records, Crane was obsessed with the quarry long before he disappeared. He'd filed multiple reports with management about unusual findings in the limestone, anomalous fossils, strange mineral deposits, even what he called unexplained biological activity in certain sections. Biological activity? Sheriff Wilson repeated. What does that mean? I don't know, but look at this. I showed him a page from Crane's personnel file which included a disciplinary note. A month before he disappeared, he was reprimanded for collecting samples from the restricted tunnels without authorization. The company confiscated the samples and threatened to fire him if he continued. Sheriff Wilson frowned. So Crane found something in those tunnels, something the company wanted to keep quiet. And then he disappeared while investigating further. Exactly. And now, 20 years later, whatever he found is active again. Our conversation was interrupted by a shout from one of the county officers near the edge of the woods. Sheriff, Over here! We rushed over to find the officer standing over what looked like a piece of torn clothing, a fragment of a uniform shirt with the Miller's Bluff PD patch still attached. Roy's shirt? There's more, the officer said, pointing deeper into the trees. Some kind of trail. We followed it, a sporadic path of torn fabric, disturbed earth, and occasionally smears of blood. It led to another opening in the ground, this one larger than the first. A jagged tear in the earth partially hidden beneath a fallen tree. Sheriff Wilson radioed for Mason and his team, who arrived minutes later with their equipment. The readings were off the charts. Whatever's happening, this opening is the epicenter, Mason said, his earlier skepticism now replaced with professional concern. We need to evacuate the area, set up a proper perimeter. What about Roy? I demanded. Mason hesitated. If he went down there? He didn't need to finish the sentence. As the evacuation order went out and personnel began to pull back to a safer distance, I made a decision. I couldn't leave Roy down there, not knowing what was waiting in the darkness. I pulled Sheriff Wilson aside. I'm going in after him. The hell you are, he replied immediately. You saw what happened last time. That's why I have to go. I know what we're dealing with. I gestured to the gathered county officers and hazmat team. They still think this is just some gas leak. Sheriff Wilson studied my face, then sighed. You're not going alone. Boss, that's final. He cut me off. If you're going, I'm coming with you. And we're doing this right. Proper equipment, backup on the surface, the works. I wanted to argue but knew he was right. Going in alone would be suicide. The next few hours were a flurry of preparation. Mason, now convinced that something unusual was happening, provided us with gas masks, monitoring equipment, and powerful flashlights. Sheriff Wilson selected 2 county officers with cave rescue experience to join us, while Pete and Sandra would coordinate from the surface. By late afternoon, we were ready. The 4 of us stood at the edge of the larger opening, now secured with temporary supports to prevent collapse. Radio check every 5 minutes, Sheriff Wilson instructed Pete. If we miss 2 checks in a row, you call for emergency backup and seal this entrance. Understood? Pete nodded, his face tense. Be careful down there. I checked my equipment one last time, gas mask, flashlight, radio, sidearm, and a shotgun slung across my back. It felt inadequate for what we might face, but it was all we had. Let's go, I said, and led the way into the darkness. The tunnel was natural at first, a narrow fissure in the limestone that descended steeply. We climbed down carefully, using the cave rescue equipment to secure our passage. After about 30 feet, the fissure widened into what was clearly a man-made tunnel, one of the quarry's old access passages. This must connect to the main tunnel system, Sheriff Wilson observed, his voice muffled by his gas mask. One of the county officers, Anderson, according to his uniform, checked a handheld device. Air quality is poor but not immediately dangerous. High CO2, trace methane. We continued deeper, the tunnel gradually widening until we could walk comfortably. The walls here were smooth, carved by quarry workers decades ago, but something about them seemed wrong. The limestone had a strange, almost organic texture in places with veins of darker material running through it. Look, I said, pointing my flashlight at a section of wall. There's one of those symbols. Sure enough, carved into the stone was the circle with a vertical line, the warning sign Jenkins had mentioned. And beside it, a dark stain where that viscous fluid had seeped from the rock. Don't touch it, Sheriff Wilson warned as Anderson moved closer to examine the symbol. What does it mean? Asked the other county officer, Rodriguez. Nothing good, I replied, continuing down the tunnel. We followed the passage for nearly 10 minutes, occasionally passing more of the symbols. The tunnel began to slope downward again, taking us deeper beneath the earth. My ears popped with the changing pressure. Radio check, Sheriff Wilson called in to the surface. Pete's response came back garbled but understandable. They were still with us, monitoring our progress. The tunnel eventually opened into a larger chamber, similar to the one where we'd found Dale's body. But this space showed signs of recent activity. Disturbed earth, what looked like drag marks across the floor, and most disturbingly, a large depression in the center filled with a pool of that colorless fluid. What the hell is that? Rodriguez asked, training his flashlight on the pool. Anderson approached cautiously, holding out his monitoring device. It immediately began beeping rapidly. These readings don't make sense, he said. The device is registering the substance as both organic and inorganic simultaneously. Stay back from it, I warned, remembering how the creature had seemed to secrete the same fluid. We skirted around the pool, heading toward another tunnel that led deeper still. As we walked, I noticed something embedded in the wall, small curved objects that at first glance resembled fossils. Sheriff Wilson saw them too. Are those bones? I moved closer, examining them carefully. They were indeed bones, but unlike any I'd seen before, too large for any animal native to Kentucky, with strange ridges and protrusions that seemed unnatural. Look at how they're positioned, Anderson observed. It's like they're growing out of the rock itself. I remembered what Jenkins had said about areas where the limestone was wrung, and Crane's reports of unexplained biological activity. Was this what he had found? Evidence of something living within the stone itself. We pressed on, the tunnel narrowing again and curving sharply downward. The air grew noticeably warmer and a faint vibration thrummed through the rock, the same subsonic pulse I'd felt before encountering the creature. Do you feel that? I asked quietly. Sheriff Wilson nodded. It's close. The tunnel opened suddenly into a vast underground chamber, so large our flashlights couldn't reach the far walls or ceiling. The floor dropped away into what appeared to be a natural pit, filled with more of the colorless fluid. But on a much larger scale, a pool perhaps 30 feet across. And there, at the edge of the pool, lay Roy Burke, or what remained of him. His body was splayed out on the stone, chest cavity torn open like Dale's had been, but there was something different about him. His skin had taken on a pale, waxy appearance, and dark veins were visible beneath the surface, pulsing with a slow rhythm. Oh, God, Rodriguez whispered. Is he? He's dead, Sheriff Wilson confirmed grimly. But something's happening to his body. As we watched in horror, Roy's fingers twitched, a subtle movement that might have been dismissed as a trick of the light if not for what happened next. His head turned, the motion jerky and unnatural, and his eyes opened. Eyes that were now clouded and colorless like the fluid in the pool. That's not possible, Anderson gasped. He can't be alive. But Roy's body was moving, struggling to sit up with movements that seemed puppeted by an unseen force. Dark fluid seeped from his mouth as his jaw worked silently. We need to leave, I said, backing away. Now. A sound from behind us made us all spin around, that familiar dragging noise coming from the tunnel we'd entered through. We were trapped. There, Sheriff Wilson hissed, pointing to another tunnel on the far side of the chamber. That might lead out. We started moving toward it, giving the pool and Roy's twitching body a wide berth. But as we reached the middle of the chamber, the vibration intensified, and the pool began to bubble and churn. Something was rising from its depths. It emerged slowly. A massive, pale shape that unfolded itself like a blooming flower made of flesh. In the beam of our flashlights, I caught glimpses of what might have been a face distorted and melted, with features that shifted and flowed as if not fully formed. The rest of its body was worse, a writhing mass of limbs and appendages that seemed to both grow from and melt back into its central mass. And embedded within this horror, visible through its translucent flesh, were human remains, bones, organs, and what might have been faces, pressing against the surface as if trying to break free. One of these half-formed faces turned toward us, and with a jolt of recognition, I realized it matched the old photograph of Victor Crane I'd seen in the missing person report. "Run!" Sheriff Wilson shouted, firing his shotgun at the creature. The blast tore through its fluid form, causing it to recoil with a sound like tearing fabric. But the wound closed almost immediately, the creature flowing around the damage like water. We sprinted for the far tunnel, Anderson in the lead. But before we could reach it, Roy's body, now fully upright, blocked our path. His movements were jerky and wrong, his head tilted at an impossible angle. "Stop," he said, but the voice wasn't his. It was deeper, resonant, and seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Why do you fear us?" Anderson raised his weapon, but Sheriff Wilson pushed it down. "Roy, are you in there?" A smile spread across Roy's face, too wide, stretching the skin unnaturally. "Roy is here. Dale is here. Victor is here. All are here." He gestured toward the creature in the pool. "All are part of the whole. What are you?" I demanded, keeping my shotgun trained on him. Roy's head tilted further, the angle making my stomach turn. "We are ancient. We slept in the stone until Victor found us, weakened us with his machines and chemicals. Now we wake. Now we grow. By killing people? Sheriff Wilson's voice was tight with anger. Not killing. Joining. Roy's body took a step toward us. Movements smoother now, as if whatever controlled him was learning how to operate his limbs. As you will join. The creature in the pool began to move toward the edge, its massive form flowing like liquid across the stone. Behind us, the dragging sound grew louder as whatever had been following us entered the chamber. We were surrounded. I looked at Sheriff Wilson, saw the realization in his eyes. We weren't getting out of this. Not all of us, anyway. Go, I told him, nodding toward the far tunnel. Get them out! I'll hold it off. Like hell you will, he replied. But I could see he understood the necessity. Someone had to stay behind. You know I'm right, I said quietly. Someone needs to warn the town, evacuate everyone. This thing is spreading. After a long moment, he nodded. What are you going to do? I glanced around the chamber, noting the unstable-looking ceiling and the support pillars left by the quarry workers. Bring the whole place down. Sheriff Wilson clasped my shoulder. It's been an honor working with you, Garrett. Likewise, boss. I turned to Anderson and Rodriguez. Get him out of here. Make sure the town is evacuated. They hesitated, then nodded, pulling Sheriff Wilson toward the far tunnel. As they moved, I faced Roy's twisted form and the creature emerging from the pool. You won't join us? Roy's voice asked, sounding almost sad. Not today, I replied, raising my shotgun. But instead of aiming at Roy or the creature, I fired at the nearest support pillar. The blast echoed through the chamber and chunks of limestone fell from the ceiling, not enough to collapse it, but a start. I fired again and again, moving from pillar to pillar as dust and rock rained down. The creature seemed to understand what I was doing. It surged forward with surprising speed, tentacle-like appendages reaching for me. I dodged, continuing my assault on the chamber's supports. Roy's body lunged at me, fingers curved into claws. I swung the shotgun like a club, catching him across the face. He fell back, that colorless fluid spraying from the wound. The chamber was beginning to collapse in earnest now, larger sections of ceiling crashing to the floor. The creature from the pool retreated, sensing the danger. This was my chance. I ran for the far tunnel, the same one Sheriff Wilson and the others had taken. Behind me, I heard the groan of stone giving way, felt the rush of air as the chamber began to implode. Something grabbed my ankle, one of the creature's appendages, wrapped tight around my leg. I fell hard, the shotgun skittering away across the stone. I looked back to see the creature pulling me toward it, back toward the collapsing chamber. Roy's body stood nearby, watching with that too-wide smile. With desperate strength, I pulled my service pistol from its holster and fired at the tentacle holding me. The fluid form recoiled, loosening its grip enough for me to break free. I scrambled to my feet and ran, the tunnel shaking around me as the collapse spread. Behind me, I heard a sound like the earth itself crying out in pain, the creature being crushed beneath tons of limestone. The tunnel sloped upward, and I could see light ahead, flashlight beams. Sheriff Wilson and the others were waiting for me. Go, I shouted as I reached them. The whole system is coming down. We ran together, the tunnel collapsing behind us as we went. Anderson fell, his leg caught by falling debris. Rodriguez and I pulled him free, dragging him between us as we continued our desperate flight. After what seemed like an eternity, we emerged from the opening into the fading daylight of early evening. Pete and Sandra rushed forward, helping us clear the area as the ground continued to shake. With a final tremendous groan, the opening collapsed completely, sending up a cloud of dust that enveloped us all. When it cleared, there was nothing left but a depression in the earth where the entrance had been. Is it over? Sandra asked as the rumbling subsided. I looked at Sheriff Wilson, saw the same uncertainty in his eyes that I felt. I don't know, I answered honestly, but we need to evacuate the town just in case. Whatever that thing was, I don't think it's something that dies easily. In the days that followed, the official story became one of unstable ground, causing a sinkhole that had claimed the lives of Dale Smith and Roy Burke. The county sealed off the quarry permanently, citing environmental concerns from the supposed gas pocket that had been discovered. Most of Miller's Bluff returned to normal within a few weeks, the inhabitants all too willing to accept the official explanation rather than confront the terrifying alternative. But I knew better. At night, I could still feel that subtle vibration in the earth beneath my feet, a reminder that something ancient and patient was still there, waiting in the darkness. The collapse might have contained it temporarily, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we had merely delayed the inevitable. Sheriff Wilson and I were the only ones who truly understood the danger. We established our own monitoring system, regularly checking the quarry for any signs of activity. So far there had been nothing, no missing persons, no strange sightings, no unexplained deaths. But sometimes, when I drive past the quarry on my night patrols, I catch glimpses of movement just beyond my headlights, pale shapes that vanish when I look directly at them. And occasionally I hear that sound again, the wet dragging noise that haunts my nightmares. Miller's Bluff may have forgotten what happened at the quarry, but I never will. I keep my shotgun loaded and a flashlight by my bed, knowing that someday, perhaps years from now, I'll hear that sound again, closer this time. And when that day comes, I'll be ready, because whatever sleeps beneath Miller's Bluff is only sleeping, not dead, never dead, just waiting.